Good morning. Good morning. Good morning. It's good to be here in Stockholm. Welcome. Welcome to the Global Forum on Migration and Development, Civil Society Days for 2014. We're going to start in 2 minutes. Thank you for coming. Good morning.
Sorry, I forgot.
think we get started. Good morning. Good morning. Great. Friends, colleagues, distinguished guests, at last we are here together. But before we start, I would like to pay tribute to a heroic woman who's supposed to be with us today as a delegate, who passed away on 31st of March, Irene Fernandez of Malaysia, who is a right to livelihood laureate, but also a defender of the human rights of the migrants, domestic workers, and the workers as a whole, all her entire life. She was looking forward coming to joining us, but she is not with us. I would like to pay tribute to her memory of Irene Fernandez, and also thousands of fellow human beings in their migration journey lost their lives across the world on the borders, external borders of our nation states. And day for yesterday, more than 50 people perished at the coast of Libya. The memory of all those great souls. Let's please stand up for a moment of silence. Please be seated. Friends, colleagues, it's a great pleasure to welcome all of you, on behalf of the Swedish civil society, to Sweden and this beautiful city of Stockholm. This is a beautiful day. Irrelevant of the fact that it is a bit cold outside, but there is plenty of warmth and joy because of the gathering of, I would say, many wonderful people from across the globe. And it's a great pleasure for us as civil society in Sweden to welcome all of you to Stockholm for our 7th Global Forum on Migration and Development Civil Society Days. At last we are here. Since Mauritius, or even since Belgium, we have walked together a long way. The global civil society has become much more focused, organized, much more trust-building and collaboration and constructive dialogue with our government counterparts. It's a great pleasure also for me to welcome Ambassador Eva and her team to these Civil Society Days. And it has been a great pleasure working with them in a spirit of collaboration and understanding. And it is always interesting to see when we look back from the 2006, how far we have come. But one of the main things, we human beings have a capacity to simplify complex realities, and the simple realities make it more complex. And I'm afraid migration is one of them. In fact, the decision of an individual human being to realize her or his dreams, to feed her family or his family, to create a better life for them, for the communities around. By doing so, creating a better life for all of us together. We are all gathered together here. We shall not forget, it is that human beings is the center. They are our concern. And that's all the more important. All our policies and politics and our meetings, our cooperation is based on how can that noble dreams and hopes of human beings to make it better for themselves and for the world in which they live in, to help and support that migratory process which we are all part of it. Look at the positive elements and positive side of the human reality, and we will reach where we want to reach, to create a better world for all of us. It's great to see we can come together to talk about the migration in a positive context, migration and development. But always, in the days to come, in our deliberations and our meetings, let's keep focused on what Irene Fernandez and many others gave their lives for. Defend the rights of those individual human beings. It is all about the dignity and justice for the human beings, while doing so for our own self too. Before I introduce our chair, I would like to end by quoting a word from the Alexander Solzhenitsyn, the Russian novelist and the Nobel laureate. Justice is conscience, not a personal conscience, but the conscience of the whole humanity. Those who clearly recognize the voice of their own conscience usually recognize the voice of justice. That's why we are here today. Let's not forget that. And I wish you, on behalf of the Swedish Society, a great time during these days, productive, focused, collaborative, and dialogue. I'm looking forward to any service we can provide you to make your stay in Stockholm comfortable, except the weather, because that is normally a responsibility of the government, but not the civil society. So, Eva knows that. We had that's the agreement between us. But anyway, enjoy the stay here. We are there for you. And before I will hand it over floor to Michelle Levoy, our chair. I don't think I need to introduce Michelle, my friend and colleague. It's a great pleasure to introduce Michelle, a dual citizen of the United States and Ireland, and totally messed up French-Canadian background. You can see the voice, the name, Levoy, I think it's voice means, no? Or derived from. I'm not pronouncing it correct, but that's okay. Michelle is a director of PICUM, which is the International Platform for Cooperation on Undocumented Migrants, the leading international organization or umbrella organization, I would say, in the world. Even though the headquarters is in Brussels, the operation is global. And she's been director for the PICUM for the last 8 years. So it's a remarkable person to work with. And she has been the famous defender of the rights of undocumented migrants and their rights, together with a fantastic team. And it's a great joy to have her as a chair for the 2014 Global Forum on Migration and Development Civil Society Days. Michelle, the floor is yours.
Good morning. Bonjour. Bienvenidos a todos a todas. It's an honor for me to follow George. I have been following George for many years. It's an honor because he's an extraordinary human being, but also in the work that he does, he's a continual inspiration. So thank you very much, George, for the introduction. Many of us have come together for many years, looking over 2 intensive days on pressing issues that civil society feels concerning migration throughout the world. And this year is the 7th time that we've come together on the global level, preceding the governmental discussion at the Global Forum on Migration and Development. I think it's nice to start off with just seeing who's in the room and how much we've been involved in this process. And I'd like to invite those of you who have been here since the beginning, from 2007, to raise your hands at the Global Forum for Civil Society. I'd like to invite those who have been at least 3 of the Civil Society Days since 2007 to raise your hands. And I'd like to invite those who are here for the first time to raise your hands. So welcome. Welcome to those who are coming for the first time, as well as those who have been through this process. It's always energizing to bring new people on board and to also continue the discussions with those who have been since the beginning. So just to give you some statistics, there's 254 registered participants. It's one of the biggest civil society days since the beginning. We're here from 68 countries around the world. But we should also bear in mind when we look at data and statistics, that doesn't give the whole picture. So there are migrant leaders who are doing crucial work in their communities on the ground, who most likely didn't even apply to come because they couldn't travel safely because they're undocumented. We should also bear that in mind. And we also have people who applied but who could not get visas. So we should also bear this in mind when we look at our whole group. But at the same time, we do manage to come together, and coming together does represent a success. And I'd like to acknowledge the efforts of many who have contributed to bringing us here today. I'd like to warmly acknowledge the efforts of the main organizer of the Civil Society Days, the International Catholic Migration Commission, ICMC. ICMC has had the honor and the privilege, I would hope to say, and I think that that would be true, of organizing the Civil Society Days since 2011. And I would say also, as participating in this process, every year not only ensures that our own 2 days of civil society run smoothly and with the highest degree of professionalism and commitment to our own movement, but very expertly handles the space where we interact with the governments in the common space. And I'd like to also acknowledge the presence of Eva Ackerman-Borja here today as testimony to that. But for this, I'd like to, all of us, recognize 2 exceptional individuals within ICMC, John Beanham, Head of Policy, and Weiss Maas, the Civil Society Coordinating Office, for leading this process of the entire Civil Society Days. And I'd like to ask them to stand up that we recognize them. Weiss and John, thank you. Accompanying Weiss and John have been the International Advisory Committee, who spent many hours for nearly the past year in planning for these 2 days. And I'd like to ask, especially on phone conversations in various time zones throughout the world. So I'd like to ask all the members of the International Advisory Committee to stand up and to thank them for their work, including the ones on the panel. Thank you. And because we as a movement are increasingly in social media, I'd also like to remind us that it's possible to use Twitter. The address is available, although you see we are so socially media, it's not on here, so I don't know exactly what the address is, but it's available. It's available at some places. And also this is, I think, maybe the first global forum where it's live streamed. Second, John is telling me. So meaning that you can also tweet that it's live streamed, and you can also tell your colleagues that the plenary sessions are live streamed, so this morning and also tomorrow afternoon. So I think to begin with, many of us know, and our testimony to it, that migration can be a very positive experience for migrants themselves, as well as for the societies that they and we contribute to. We don't have to look far anywhere to see the contributions that migrants are making to our societies and our economies. In the arts and in culture, many of us know well-known migrants, artists with migrant background. I feel like an artist myself with this here. Sports, I think it's also interesting looking at the World Cup this year, how many teams will have migrant background, particularly from Europe. Science and technology. Colloquially, the name genius also is referred to in Einstein, and Einstein himself was a forced migrant to the United States. Politics, children of migrants who become future leaders of their countries. The country where I live, Belgium, the Prime Minister's father was a migrant from Italy who went to go work in the coal mines of Belgium to improve the life of his family. And economy. The World Bank estimated that in 2013, migrants sent back more than $400 billion to their countries of origin. And for some countries, as we all know, this amount sent back represents half of the GDP. So we must recognize and celebrate all of these countless and other achievements of migrants throughout the world. But at the same time, we also have to bear in mind, and I think that this is also what brings us here today, is that it's not always a success story. It represents huge costs to migrants. For millions of low-wage workers whose earnings are sustaining their economies in countries of origin, for millions of these migrants, their experiences are continuous daily violations of human rights. And we note with increasing alarm a number of the costs of migration throughout the world, and I'd just like to highlight a couple to start us off. Racial discrimination. A survey released last week in France indicated that people of North African descent were 5 times as likely as those without immigrant origins to be stopped and searched by the police. We have to remember in a statistic like that, that many of those French, North African descent who were interviewed are French citizens. There's also been a disturbing development in the Dominican Republic, whose constitutional court decided in September of last year to strip thousands of Dominicans of Haitian descent their citizenship. And this ruling may affect many, many migrants because it's retroactive. It goes back until 1929. Another issue is lack of access to social protection. The impacts of the global economic crisis have been acute in many parts of the world, where we see an increase in unemployment, particularly amongst youth, and restrictions on access to public services. The Women in Global Migration Working Group, many of whom are here today, has stressed the gender dimension of social protection to ensure that women in countries of origin, as well as in destination, are able to avail of access to social services and portability of rights. Yet migrants and those who are irregular especially often bear the brunts of the cuts to social services. And an example is in Spain, as part of the government's response to austerity measures, a law was passed in 2012 restricting access to universal health care for all migrants. That previously was one of the hallmarks of the Spanish system. It was one of the most progressive countries in Europe concerning access to health care and undocumented. The first victim of the health cuts was a man called Alpha Pam, a 28-year-old man from Senegal, who died in April last year from tuberculosis, an entirely preventable disease. Alpha Pam attended the health center in the Balearic Islands on 3 occasions, but because of his deteriorating health, because of his disease, but he was refused treatment each time. He died alone at home without any medical care after suffering from 8 days. Another issue is lack of decent work. The inability to obtain decent working conditions in countries of origin throughout the world compels migrants to accept conditions as contract workers or to find work in the informal economy as undocumented workers under conditions that are increasingly considered social dumping. In this insecure employment, we have workers facing exploitative and dangerous conditions. And any of the colleagues here from the Gulf countries or from South Asia can attest and will very easily quote research as well as practical experience in the hundreds of migrants from South Asia who are being returned every year in body bags from the Gulf countries because of workplace accidents and other unnatural deaths. But at the same time, all of these colleagues here will say that there are hundreds more every day waiting to go to those countries to work for employment. We also need to look at access to justice for those workers to challenge their exploitative situations, also when they are dependent on the employer, particularly for female domestic workers. The lack of regular channels for migration is particularly at odds with the needs of many economies. A number of sectors of the economy in destination countries rely to various degrees on precarious workers to carry out work. A fourth issue is securitization of borders. We see on the ground throughout the world that restrictions in border security have resulted in many migrants taking dangerous routes to seek better lives. The Mexican National Human Rights Commission, of which organizations here work quite closely, has documented 20,000 kidnappings of migrants over 2 separate 6-month periods in the previous years. These kidnappings have not only been Central and South Americans in transit, but also Mexican migrants. And I think it's also important, and this will be one of the themes that we look at, is in the context of unsafe border crossings, we're increasingly seeing the presence of children, moving to seek better lives themselves, moving to be reunited with their families. And I wanted to tell you a particular example of Noemi Alvarez Quille, who was 12 years old, raised by her maternal grandparents in Ecuador. Her parents were both undocumented in the United States, and she had not seen them since she was 3 years old. In May of last year, she tried to travel to the US to join them, but was arrested after spending 2 months in Nicaragua and returned to Ecuador. On February 4th of this year, she left in her home in Ecuador to try to reach her parents with the help of a smuggler. A month later, in March, she and her smuggler were arrested in Ciudad Juarez in Mexico. She was taken to the Casa de la Esperanza, a shelter for Mexican children. There, she was questioned by a prosecutor and described as crying inconsolably after being questioned. A few days later, on 11 March 2014, she was found hanged from a shower curtain rod in a bathroom at the shelter. Her death, ruled a suicide by Mexican authorities, is still under investigation. How do we address the multiple policy failures if a 12-year-old girl who wants to be reunited with her parents takes her own life? I think that this is an important question that we have to bear in mind, as well as observing the deaths of all those who try to improve their lives. And the last issue is the criminalization of migration. We see this increasingly with the use of detention facilities throughout the world, although research has shown that detention is not a deterrent to irregular migration, of deportations of migrants which tear families apart. A report found that more than 5,000 US citizen children were taken into foster care because their parents were either detained or deported due to their irregular status. And I think increasingly, and this is where we all have a role to play, is discourse and framing and terminology. The use of the term illegal migrant or the illegal migration to talk about undocumented or irregular migrants. Why is terminology and framing important? Because language contributes to shape the reality which authorities present to their population and to the world. And in a context where the use of language associates the concepts of migrants and criminality, migration and criminality, irregular migration becomes beyond language, intrinsically considered as linked with security and crime. So the framing is also important. And that's where I'd like to end, is how are we framing this? So amid all the costs, the human costs especially of migration, I think what also brings us here is we are all working together to contribute to a new mindset change, a new framing and a new way of telling the story that's already being done on the ground. I'd like to actually highlight a very homegrown example of framing of mindset and especially change. And I'd like to honor George Joseph's contribution to this. George has been working for more than 25 years, or maybe even 30, in Sweden, directly with migrants and witnessing the impact that the lack of services has on those who are the most vulnerable. 15 years ago, he was part of a movement in 1998 of voluntary health clinics that were set up to provide health services, awareness raising, and advocacy concerning undocumented rights and access to healthcare here in Sweden. In 2007, over a 4-year period, research from EU civil society networks, fundamental rights bodies, various types of reports made a comparison of different EU member states and their legislation concerning access to healthcare for undocumented. And all of that research actually showed that, surprisingly, Sweden was one of the most restrictive. Undocumented at the time could only access healthcare emergency services, but they had to pay. In 2007, the UN Special Rapporteur on Health made a visit to Sweden and made a very strong report with recommendations concerning access to healthcare. And so also that year, the Right to Health initiative began. This is a very interesting and phenomenal movement because it brought together more than 64 organizations, NGOs, health professionals, trade unions throughout the country to have a common standpoint to improve access to healthcare. At the same time, several hospitals, city councils, and regions were making more favorable policies than the national level in granting access. In 2011, the government had a public inquiry suggesting that access is actually necessary. And the culmination of all of these 15-year efforts was a new law which was enacted on the 1st of July 2013, enabling undocumented children in Sweden to have access to healthcare on the same basis as national children, and undocumented adults to have medically necessary care. I'd like to highlight this because I think it's a crucial success, and we have to recognize our victories and also recognize how the victory came in place. And I would really stress that the efforts of many different actors at different points of time, but especially good contact and collaboration or consultation between civil society and the government to improve that. And I think that this is also then what brings us here today and how we look at other movements or examples. The mobilization of migrant domestic workers, which resulted in the ILO 189 Domestic Workers Convention, was crucial to have migrant domestic workers and migrants' rights activists working to get that convention. The Dreamers movement in the United States of undocumented young people who mobilized together to have regular residence and opportunities for higher education. All of these examples and the many others that I think we will look at demonstrate the need for migrants to be empowered, to speak with their own voices, and to work closely with migrants' rights advocates. So we look forward in the coming 2 days to come together as civil society actors to advance an agenda, our agenda, which upholds the human rights and dignity of millions of migrants throughout the world, and deliver clear messages at the end of this process to governments on how we can reach these goals. So thank you. So I'd now like to introduce our co-chair, Jibril Fall, who is an extraordinary advocate, diaspora leader and practitioner, management consultant, business advisor, and university lecturer. I don't know if he could have any more hats than that, but he's been doing all of this for over 15 years in private, public, and charitable sector development. He's also chair of the diaspora organization African Foundation for Development, or FORD, which is based in the United Kingdom. He's also the founder of Remit Aid, a program to transform remittances into a sustainable form of international development finance using tax reliefs and other macroeconomic policies. And he's the director of the private firm GK Partners in London, which advises businesses on ethical business models, social enterprise, legal structures, ethical and Islamic finance, corporate responsibility, and governance. That's a lot of words, and that's the other thing that I would also like to say, that Jibril has the gift of being a very strong orator or storyteller or a man of words. I was very much impressed by his inputs last year at the high-level dialogue in New York. They're on YouTube. If any of you would like to be inspired, please watch them again. But I would like to very much warmly welcome Jibril Fall as our co-chair.
Thank you very much, Michelle. The topic for the 2014 Civil Society Days for Global Forum for Migration and Development is Shaping Migration and Development, Global Movement, Change on the Ground. Michelle, I've thought about it very seriously and for a very long time. And I've decided I'll talk to you about high school physics instead. My physics master told me that the first law, Newton's first law of motion, is that a body remains in rest or in perpetual motion unless compelled by some other force to act otherwise. As a young person and foolish, I said, well, that sounds a bit like the life of a teenager. A body remains in bed until forced by a parent to wake up. So you see, when I was young, I thought Newton's first law of motion was about lazy teenagers. Now I'm not young, perhaps slightly less foolish. I think Newton's first law of motion is about global movements and change on the ground. Movements of people here, there, and everywhere, and in their wake, they leave footprints of change and progress. I can visualize it. And this visualization in my mind is quite important as to what we want to achieve. Beyond movements, global movements, and change on the ground being Newtonian laws, lazy teenagers, teachers, and irrepressible mothers, we need to form a vision of where we take this. Distinguished delegates, it is a singular honor to meet and greet you all. A perennial joy to see friends and colleagues, and an exciting prospect to encounter new activists and actors in the field of migration and development. Global movement, change on the ground, is about people, isn't it? Let us not forget this in the heat of debate or in the pressures of negotiations. It is indeed about people. As humans, we have the latent power to imagine virtuous global movements and the patent ability to make progressive changes on the ground. Pray, let us not be limited by imagination or the paucity of will. And each of us in our own nation states, our institutions and organizations, can imagine and actualize fair and fine migration settlement for a world in motion. In my estimation, amongst the greatest ideas ever perceived by man or humankind is the concept of evolution with Sir Charles Darwin. Yet, after his travels in the Galapagos Islands, returning to the green fields of England, and having an idea so revolutionary, at that very time, a Welshman on the Malay archipelago, Alfred Russel Wallace, had also thought about it. Some of the solutions that we need are less ambitious and less complex than those, so we can all imagine it in our different ways. How then do we normalize global movement and change on the ground? This is for us to deliberate on. And may we be guided by ambition tempered with pragmatism. I was going to say, may we have the energy to have a vibrant discussion. Then I thought this audience can indeed discuss. Maybe we shouldn't pray for more energy on that. I'm reminded by St. Augustine, who of course said, Lord, save us from incontinence and temptation, but not yet. As a guide to our deliberations, we just need to do two things: accentuate the positives and mitigate the negatives. It's no more complex than that. Perhaps one guide that would be useful in the next 2 days is a word I want to introduce you to, a word that torments and menaces the Wolof people of Senegambia. The Wolof people in the region of Senegambia are tormented by a word called tumuranke. And I want to introduce you to this word. Tumuranke, in the nearest meaning, is a sudden and total loss of social bearing. And the Wolofs of Senegambia are terrified of sudden and complete loss of social bearings. And in their mind, that happens, that is a hazardous part of the life of a migrant. For a migrant, most suddenly can find themselves without the social bearing, without friends, without family, without things they are familiar with. Well, the Wolof of Senegambia, how do they deal with their fear of tumuranke? They pray a lot. They are traumatized, but mostly they are kind to strangers. For they believe that if they are kind to strangers who come amongst their midst, that their own people will meet generosity and friendship in the wide world that they go to. So when we deliberate in these times of negotiations for a post-2015 settlement, when we deliberate on global movements and change on the ground, let us focus our minds on clarity and exactitude for want of one thing: the abolition of tumuranke and the relief of the people, the Wolof people of Senegambia, of their fear of sudden and total loss of social orientation. I thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Jibril. As I said, man of many words, sometimes few, but very powerful and much wisdom. Thank you. I'd also like to welcome now, for a presentation of the theme and methodology of this year's Global Forum Civil Society Days, our Civil Society Coordinator, Wismas, who will make a presentation for us.
Good morning, everyone. It's quite difficult to speak after Jibril, Michel, and George with such inspiring talks, and I just have the boring task of talking you through the program. But I'll do that as fast as I can and as brief as I can so that we can go back into the substance and back into the program and listen to another set of inspiring speakers that we have lined up after this presentation about the program. But before that, maybe practical, going back to Michel's note about the Twitter and the live stream. If you go to the GFMD Civil Society website, which is gfmdcivilsociety.org, there is a live stream that you can click on and share with people. So it's just gfmdcivilsociety.org. And the Twitter feed is posted around the building, but it's GFMD CSD with a hashtag, of course, as Twitter is. So that was just for the practical announcements. Before I go into the program, of course, I would also want to direct a word of thanks to our great co-chairs, Michel Lavoie and Angie Brofal, for agreeing to take on this role this year. It's a privilege to work with you, and you thanked ICMC in your opening statement, which was really not necessary, but it has indeed been an honor and a privilege to be this civil society coordinator over the past years, because we get to work with such an inspiring and extraordinary group of people, and Michel and Jibril are two of the top leaders of that group of people. So great thanks to you, and great thanks, of course, to the Swedish government and the Swedish team, and to Eva, who is here with us today for hosting us in this beautiful city of Stockholm. Although it's raining, it's still gorgeous, and we're we're excited to be here. And also a great thanks to our local partner Caritas Sweden for having been such a great host. So I'm going to talk to you through the program, but because we saw that there's quite a few people that are at the GFMD for the first time, and also for all of us to remind us what this GFMD actually is, I'm just going to go through a few very, very rather basics, but just to remind us how the civil society days are organized and what happens after. So, as you know, for better or for worse, the GFMD is the only annual forum where governments and civil society meet separately or semi-separately and together to talk about migrants and with migrants and about migration and development. The GFMD used to consist of 4 days. This year the GFMD consists of 5 days, which means we have 2 days of civil society deliberations ahead of us, Monday and Tuesday. The governments meet on Thursday and Friday for their meetings and their deliberations. But on Wednesday, we have a full day of shared, or almost a full day of shared space with governments. And during this shared space, Michel Lavoie, as our chair, will give a report back of what we concluded and decided and discussed during our civil society days. So the task upon us the next days is give Michel the input that she needs to go out to governments, and we're expecting quite a large group. I think about 700 people are registered for that session, to go out to governments and convey our message as collective civil society. And after that, after the presentation of the civil society report, there's also a presentation of Ban Ki-moon, of the Crown Princess Victoria, there is a thing called Common Space, where we will meet in breakout groups with groups of governments to talk about specific themes. So that's going to be another opportunity for us as civil society to convey some of our messages, some of our recommendations that we want to put out to governments. So that's the basic structure of the GFMD. The government days itself are rather close to civil society, although there are a few civil society experts that participate in various sessions, and the government days result usually in a set of outcomes and a set of recommendations that are non-binding, but that are taken forward by national governments to their home countries to change their policies and practices. So, again, for better and worse, if the GFMD is one thing, it's very much an agenda-setting forum, and it's a place where we try to change minds and mindsets and practices, all to improve the conditions under which migrants, families, and communities live, work, and move. So that's just the basic about the GFMD. Then about this year's Civil Society Days. As Jibril has already quite eloquently introduced, the theme that's been chosen as the overarching focus by the steering committee is shaping migration and development goals, global movement, change on the ground. So why this theme? What's the story behind it, and what does it mean for your work ahead of you in the coming days? Well, first of all, the focus on goals and the focus on migration and development goals is very much a reflection of the priority of civil society to build upon all the outcomes and recommendations that we already have from previous years. We don't start from scratch. And if you look into your welcome packages, you will find 3 specific documents that have been put. 2 of them have been put out by civil society. One is the famous 5-year 8-point plan with 8 priority issues that were presented by civil society to governments last year for collaboration. One is a set of 7 recommendations that came out of the GFMD Civil Society Days in 2012, including a few benchmarks, how we can measure progress. And the third one is the famous declaration that came out of the UN High-Level Dialogue last year in 2013. And we put that there because it's a document that's been agreed upon by governments, by consensus, and has quite a lot of interesting promises and articles in the declaration. So we wanted you to use that as a reference point. So the idea of this focus on shaping goals is to take these recommendations that we have already concluded as civil society and as governments, and to try if we can translate that into more concrete and more tangible and more measurable indicators and benchmarks. How do we measure whether in 3 years from now we've actually achieved what we recommended a year ago, what we recommended in the 5-year plan? At the same time, of course, shaping migration and development goals in this year, 2014, with the Millennium Development Goals almost expiring, it also very much links back to how do we ensure that migrants, migration, mobility becomes part of a new global development paradigm and a new global development agenda. So you will see, and I'll get to that later, that quite a few elements in the agenda today and tomorrow will look at this so-called post-2015 development agenda. So then there's the second part of the sentence, which says global movement, change on the ground. This is very much a reference to the global movement that we collectively as civil society have been making over the past years, how we have connected and converged different perspectives and tried to come up with a unified voice, or unified voices maybe is a better expression to use. It's also a reference to further global movement that's needed by us as civil society, and global movement that's needed from governments to structurally change something about the global institutional setting around migration. But at the same time, there is this sentence that says local, or change on the ground, local implementation. And this is a reflection that the reason why I think we all work in this field is because we want to change things on the ground in the daily lives of migrants, of families, or communities, whether it is to prevent forced migration, whether it is to tell a different narrative about migration, to protect migrant workers from abuses. We all want change on the grounds. So therefore, while the program is focused on formulating goals and targets and indicators, we don't want to lose the personal story and the local perspective. And we very much invite you to, particularly during the working sessions, share some inspiring practices and examples where things have changed or where things are not going well, but on the local level, so that when we go home, there's something we can immediately start working on, and we don't have to wait for the post-2015 development agenda to be accepted and developed. So what's the flow of the program? This morning session, we focus specifically on the global movements that have been taking place in civil society, and there is a specific session on the post-2015 agenda. And in between, we will be welcomed, and we're very grateful for that, by the Minister Billström for Asylum and Migration. Then in the afternoon today and tomorrow morning, there's a set of breakout sessions structured around 3 thematic tracks. So there's one thematic track that completely focuses on labor, labor mobility, and labor rights. Then there is a thematic track that focuses on protection of migrants, protection of children. And then there's a thematic track that focuses on development and the role of diaspora and migrants in development, in the countries where they go to and in the countries where they came from, or countries of heritage. So you can choose a session to go to this afternoon and a session to go to tomorrow morning, but the sessions that happen this afternoon and the sessions that happen tomorrow morning are linked. So the idea is that conclusions that are already drawn today don't have to be repeated tomorrow. And as I said, the goal of this working sessions is very much to come up with a set of goals and indicators for progress, while at the same time try to identify a set of inspiring practices. So maybe very briefly, because this is a word that we use quite often, indicators, benchmarks, goals. What does that mean? When we write project proposals, we have to come up with how do we measure that this project was a success in 3 years from now. There is a document out on the tables that gives a matrix with different targets and indicators that relate to the post-2015 development goals. And or the post-2015 development agenda, I should say. And certain indicators or targets you could think of while you're going into your working sessions is, for example, an easy one, a reduction in the cost of sending remittances to less than 5%, preferably 0%, a rapid decrease in the use of immigrant detention, specifically for children, but then, of course, with the objective to have no child ever again in immigration detention as soon as possible, abolishing of the systems of tied employment for example, in a few years from now, striving for equal pay, for equal work, whether you're an immigrant or not, and so on and so forth. So that's the kind of targets and indicators we're trying to get out of the working sessions. The results of the working sessions will be recorded by a rapporteur, will be printed out for you tomorrow morning so that you will know what happened in the previous working sessions. And the same thing will happen tomorrow during the lunch break, so that you will have all the outcomes of all the different working sessions. And in the afternoon, the rapporteurs will actually do a report back of what was discussed, and there's an opportunity for you to add if you feel that things were left out. And then the last thing I should say about the working sessions is, unlike the plenaries, which are live streamed and which are recorded, the working sessions happen in a closed space. They're not being live streamed, and they take place under Chatham House rules, which means that you cannot be quoted outside of the room. So you should feel free to speak your mind without being afraid that might leave the room. But we should say, and we're grateful for that we do have government participation in these days and media participation in these days, which will also be attending the working session. So just it's an open space, but it happens under Chatham House rules. Then the last thing I might want to say something about is what you see on the program. There's something mysterious called a green room. There's a session on the program this morning, the last session before we break for lunch, that will look at the post-2015 development agenda, and there will be some speakers giving an insight on where we are with regards to getting migrants and migration into this framework. But we figured that's probably not enough time to hear all your perspectives on what this post-2000 development framework would look like. And at least for me, it's also quite complicated to see where are the entry points, which governments do we talk to, how do we approach the UN. So therefore, we have dedicated a room during both lunch spaces today, during lunch, and tomorrow during lunch, for a longer, more in-depth session about specifically the post-2015 development agenda. So that will start today at 12:30, and then tomorrow as well as 12:30. And this is coordinated by John Bingham, Bob van Dillen, and Colin Raja. So they will be the ones to go to for further information. Then, if there's still not enough space during that hour to get your voices heard, or if you want to have a bit more of an informal, smaller conversations with a few of you, there's also a green room available right after lunch for 90 minutes today, and then right before lunch for 90 minutes tomorrow. This is all in your package in a little green card with the times and where this is taking place. And that's very much dedicated to strategizing together in terms of content, what are we aiming for as civil society, but also strategizing in terms of process, where are the entry points, which governments do we talk to. And then tomorrow, to conclude, we will wrap up in a concluding debate where Sir Peter Sutherland, the government of Switzerland and the government of Bangladesh will take part together with our moderators of the working sessions in a concluding debate that will very much look at this nexus between global recommendations and global movement, and how are we going to make sure that this is actually implemented on the ground. So that session is going to hopefully be an inspiring debate of, okay, we'll go home after these civil society days, and what do we do when we get home? What do we implement? And then on Wednesday, it's common space that I already talked about. So to conclude, I was talking to Michelle Lavoie yesterday about the coming days and how we are set and prepared. And Michelle said something. She said, we do have quite a moment here. There will be close to 1,000 people in the room on Wednesday, and Ban Ki-moon might be listening to us. So let's think carefully, but also boldly, on what our messages should be during that day on Wednesday. And I wish you a very inspiring forum.
Thank you very much, Wies, for helping us to fully comprehend the logic behind the program and also explaining some of those sessions. And I think also making us realize also what we have as the goal ahead of us the next 2 days. And I'd just like to reiterate what we said at the beginning of how do we get from the recommendations that we've had in previous years to measuring them in targets, indicators, and benchmarks, so being very concrete, and how not to lose our local perspective. So thank you very much, Wies. I'd like to now very warmly welcome the next panel session, which is called Movements and Momentum. I'd like to invite them to move up to the panel. And I'd like to invite William Goyce, Julie Bessario, John Bingham, and Berenice Valdez.
Thank you.
Good job, boss. Please. Yeah.
Yeah, it's all right. Here. If you want to, you can speak some there. Hard talk. It's my style with it. It's like this sit down.
Is that okay with you?
Yeah.
Okay. We're just trying to see if everything works here. This is a new concept called Inspired from Davos. So that's why we're all sitting here like this. But I would call it the Stockholm style rather than the Davos style, to have a new framing for what we mean by civil society coming together and talking on armchairs on the stage instead of sitting and or standing at the lectern there. So this movement is, this panel is called Movements and Momentum, and we have some of the key civil society people here representing a number of these movements that have taken place over the past year, the past years, the past days, that we'd like to have an interactive discussion with you on. So I'd like to first very welcome William Goyce, the Regional Coordinator of Migrant Forum in Asia, to invite us to talk a little bit about this 5-year 8-point plan. So this is this yellow document that was in your packets. William, you've been involved, you were chair in Geneva in 2011, so you have a long-standing experience with the civil society days, with civil society movements, and particularly with this document. But this might not be familiar for many people in the room. So I'd like to first invite you to kind of remind us what is this document and what did we want to do with this document?
Okay. Is it working? Is it working? Yeah.
Hi.
I can't find it.
It's okay. We're so used to this style.
Okay. No, I guess, it's what George started with when he said civil society is more organized, more collaborative, and more constructive. No? But let me challenge that thesis actually first to say that we as civil society has always been organized. Civil society has always been collaborative, and civil society has always tried to be constructive. No? I think, but what this document represents is an attempt by civil society that has been coming together for the Global Forum for the longest time. And some of us have actually been here for the last 3 days as well, deliberating on the 5 points, what's in the 5 points and things like that. But it's largely about us coming together to say, we've been coming for such a long time to have this dialogue with governments. And it's time that we came with an agenda that we could work on together. And it was a massive exercise of us agreeing among ourselves to say, we can't put everything under the sun. We would like that, but we can't do that, though we work on everything. So let's narrow it down and see what there is. And so we tried, and with a lot of the tensions that go at narrowing down a kind of discourse, we agreed on these 8 points. But what was important in the 8 points was the 5 years. You know, that we said over the next 5 years, we want to work with governments on this. And we took this message to the high-level dialogue. And I think this is the challenge that we have to actually look at today, is since we made that statement, and since governments at the high-level dialogue said they welcome the 5-year, so after rolling out that welcome mat, we've got to see where the collaboration is actually happening. So it would be nice for us to have that discussion over these days to see how far we have moved on that collaboration since it was pronounced in the high-level dialogue.
I think that's important, you know, that you centralize this process. So where have we come from with this document, that we have been continuously making these recommendations and coming together as civil society. This was an attempt to capture it, to centralize it. And the culminating point was delivering it, so as a plan last year. Can you see, and I know that you've just said that the next 2 days we'll be looking at this, how are we actually making some progress on that? But can you, from your own experience, maybe in Asia, with your network that works not only now in Asia, but also setting up a new network in West Asia, or in the Middle East, can you see, or globally, can you see any progress so far from your own experience on any of these issues?
I think for sure, like if you say focusing on the development issues, we and Jill will share more about this kind of thing. There has been progress among civil society in looking at the post-2015 discourse and how we want to come to that with a perspective on civil society working on migration issues. On labor mobility, the trade unions have had a meeting. We've had a meeting over the last few days, and a lot of that discussion is going to come forward. But in terms of, I think we still have to look at what are the partnerships that have happened between civil society and governments. And yes, in Asia we have made progress in the sense of, yes, we have been able to approach some governments, and there are governments that have followed through with saying, yes, we would like to collaborate. Or yes, we welcome the idea of the 5 points. But I think what needs to be tested is, how do you take this forward? Like when you say, yeah, let's collaborate, what does that mean? You know, I guess, what is the next step in that? After you say, yeah, let's collaborate, what's the next step? Do we work on reforming something, seeing how we bring in more legislation for rights of migrant workers? Do we look at what are the development programs of the country and say, how does migration fit into this? Do we look at the recruitment industry and say, okay, it needs to be reformed, or look at other processes and things like that? What is it? What do you do? What is the next step in terms of collaboration? And I think a good idea might be to test that. You know, I don't know if you haven't done this, but maybe we could actually put up a booth here before the government days with the 5 points, and us as civil society, whoever among us is working on these 8 points, sign up for the 8 points, and we make a directory of the 8 points that civil society is working on and give it to the governments to say, okay, these are the organizations you can work with on any of these 8 points, you know, so that maybe the governments don't know who to work with, you know, or what kind of programs are out there. So if we give them a list of the organizations that are working in their core competencies or something like that on any of these 8 points, and take it forward. And governments, you know, like the treaty bodies have this sign-up booth when they're going to ratify a convention. So maybe governments can sign up to that list, okay, and then we can explore with the governments that process.
I think it's a really practical thing to really conceptualize for us, how to kind of practically move this forward. And I was wondering, with the agenda this year, we have a new session. I think Weiss mentioned it briefly, these breakfast sessions on Wednesday, where we're in 5 or 6 thematic areas, sitting down with maybe 6 civil society and 6 governments to look at very specific themes, Do you see this as maybe a potential space for looking at some of this in depth?
Actually, no. Because, I mean, I think that there's a lot of this that can happen here, right? And the governments will come into the room, and it will be like when we go to the mall, we look at the different shops and things like that. We don't really buy anything. You know, the malls are good for that. But it's the air conditioning and all is all good. But I think what really needs to happen is going back to the capitals and making it happen. So how do we get what happens here to translate into concrete action in the capitals? Now, if that doesn't happen, we can come here every year like we are. And, you know, the mall syndrome.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, if we'd like to clap, we can. I think that's fine. Okay, thank you. I'd like to move on now to another movement. So it's Impressions from the 8th People's Global Action on Migration, Human Rights and Development. Julie Bessario from the Transnational Migration Platform. Julie, this PGA, as it's called, has just taken place. I think probably most of us on this panel have actually been at the PGA the past 2 days. But there's many in the room also who don't know what this process is. So can you kind of explain what is the PGA, what have we been doing, how does it relate to the official civil society days for the audience?
Yes, can you hear me? Yes, I think so. Yeah, actually, as William stated, civil society organizations have been trying to how effectively lobby towards governments on the key issues on migration and development. So when in 2006, the UN high-level dialogue was there, we had a PGA, a People's Parallels event, People's Global Action on Migration and Development and Human Rights. And so since then, the PGA, the People's Global Action, has been an independent civil society parallel process where different grassroots migrants organizations come together and together have a dialogue and have a strengthened analysis about key issues on migration and development. So since the GFMD 2007 up to 2012, we have been there side and trying to have this dialogue with governments, with other civil societies.
So why, how does it relate to this space that we have here? How would you see that? So the PGA has always been kind of organizing it. It emerged actually from the need to have a place where we really look at a human rights focus to migrants. And it also emerged from some of the limitations and capacity, I think, in the room of the official civil society days, and the fact that, for example, not 2 people can come from the same organization here, whereas many more could come there. But then how do you see the two relating? Or can you maybe give an example? What has the PGA looked at as themes in the past couple of days?
Yes, in the sense of, in the very first beginning in 2006, we were on the streets. And it has evolved since then, since the ICMC has come and become responsible for organizing the civil society days, organizing the civil society days. We have been trying to have this dialogue together and how we can combine our efforts towards lobby towards migration and development and governments. And so, so since 2013, we have put this on the table. And of course, these are very big issues, which we cannot discuss within 2 days. So within this day, for example, in Stockholm, we have been trying to focus on 2 issues, the development issues and the rights of migrants.
Mm-hmm. And also one of the issues was the migrants in crisis, wasn't it?
Yes, so that includes indeed the rights of migrants, which include migrants in crisis.
Mm-hmm. Is there anything that you feel as a participant, not necessarily an organizer, but as yourself as a participant of the PGA, how do you see that, how do you see the importance of it for yourself?
Yeah, I think the most important thing, and I think within the dialogue, when we are talking about how do we proceed with this document towards our governments, the obstacle that we are saying is how the gap actually, and not actually only with governments, also with other stakeholders, the gap between policy and the realities of migrants, where we have to start the dialogue from the beginning, in a sense. So that process is very much, it takes a lot of time, and I don't know whether how we can say, okay, we can really start this dialogue to go towards a kind of shaping the policies. But I think it's now about, okay, what are you thinking of? What are your interests and what are our interests? And how can we go together to the same road? So that's for us as organizers. And this is also a kind of document that gives and facilitates us as migrants organizations to have this dialogue. Because our language, although I have to say our language is in here, we still have to challenge it, but it gives us an opening, and it is a possibility for us, yeah.
Thank you, Julie. I think it's important to also highlight that the PGA is also a space, as you say, for trying to discuss what our language is. There are many places actually where civil society comes together and really tries to tackle a lot of the concepts concerning migration, and the PGA is definitely one of those spaces. And I think the overlap this year between some of the thematic issues that we'll look at here, that we've already looked at as well this weekend, has also been a good preparatory process. And I think also a number of the grassroots organizations really working directly with migrants, also very contributing very closely at the PGA, is also a hallmark of it.
Yes. Can I, because we have created some key messages, and I thought I can do it from my heart, but still I have to read it from the paper because I think it's very important. Although some of the languages are still very much into discussion among ourselves, but I just would like to read 7 key messages that we have formulated during the PGA. So these are our 4 key messages. So we say that the dominant development paradigm produces inequities that compel migration. We need to move towards people and nature-centered, rights-based development and corporate accountability. Policies should consider migration in its entire complexity, and migration should be a choice and not as a necessity. So on migration in the post-2015 development agenda, we say that first is that the national and international laws and obligations should guarantee a decent work for all, including migrant workers, regardless of status and in countries of origin and destination. Second is that states should pursue robust and comprehensive social protection policies in critical areas of community well-being, such as education, healthcare, and housing. And migrants' remittances are neither an answer to development nor an appropriate policy for poverty reduction. So those 3 were for the post-2015. And on migrants in crisis, although there was a lot of discussion about this framing, we think it should be put within the context of the consequence of the systemic problem within our current paradigm of development. We say that the framework of migrant in countries of crisis is far too limiting and must be widened to include conditions of particular vulnerability that produce situations of permanent crisis of migrants. I should say we're exposed permanently in vulnerable and precarious situation. Migrants in crisis should be considered in a human rights framework that moves beyond humanitarian responses to address root causes of injustice and migrants' vulnerability. Humanitarian responses must be swift, efficient, inclusive, and meet the immediate needs of migrants in crisis. No migrant, irrespective of status, should be subjected to punitive measures due to particular vulnerabilities in crisis situations. and countries of origin, destination, and transit must be held to account for policies that criminalize migrants and for the creation of national security apparatuses that result in perpetual crisis situation for migrants. So those are our key messages from the PGA.
Thank you very much, Jilly. I think it's really crucial to hear these key messages also because they will provide a basis for a number of the discussions that we'll have in those thematic areas over the next couple of days. I'd like to now invite John Beanham, eminent former chair of the Civil Society Days and coordinator here at ICMC of the Civil Society Days. But John, you were acting chair in Mexico in 2010 of the Civil Society Days, and since 2011, as has been mentioned in the beginning, ICMC has been organizing the Civil Society Days. So it's a big role, and I think it's really good for all of us to hear, how do you see any progress that you've had as civil society coordinator in the past 3 years? We should also mention that prior to ICMC coordinating the Civil Society Days, private foundations were coordinating with an international advisory board of civil society helping that process. But it's really important to recognize that since 2011, civil society has been organizing itself, in a sense. So it's been a big role, and ICMC has been carrying it out. So how do you see as some progress that we've had since doing that? Big question.
Well, thanks a lot, Michelle, but the biggest progress is that it's not just one organization and not just one concept of eminence. There's quite an eminent group of civil society movements and leaders that have been working on this for many years. And I would recognize in the room Gustavo Lara, the president of Bancomer, Corporate Social Responsibility now, who was the coordinator for the Mexican Civil Society Days in 2010, and raised a bar that I think we've been trying hard to match, certainly from the first years and along the way, but certainly put some of the movement in the direction of greater coordination, greater cooperation, first in civil society. So the multiple movements, the People's Global Action in particular, connecting more and more to the Civil Society Days. The before and after effort of civil society to recognize, like governments do and try more to do, that this is not just about an event once a year or so for a couple of days or even a week. The real work is on the ground, and the real challenge is connecting. As William's great imagery of the mall, or the shop or the bodega. You can go to it and you look for something, and sometimes you find something good there, but it's only good when you bring it home and share it and do something with it. Same thing with this mall here, this global mall on migration and development. But the connecting is what's different, I think. The connecting on the substance, the flow this week from the people, the very excellent people, global action meetings, Saturday, Sunday, the real focus on post-2015 development and migrants in crisis, among other issues. The effort to connect to work done before and work that has to be done after. But the multiple movements. The increasing engagement of diaspora and migrant groups themselves as individuals and as organizations and networks here in the Global Forum. The trade unions, the constant engagement of trade unions in these events and processes, organizing as well as thinking and acting. The NGOs, of course, in big numbers. Academics in some numbers. Private sector, we've all got to continue to figure out, but connecting across the movements and across time.
I think it's the connecting in the various spaces and not just the event itself. It's important to consider all that framing. But I wanted to also ask about the event itself and the common space. Do you see an evolution in this over the past 3 years, and do you see improvements? Because this is at the event itself, the official space, where we're also connecting. So this year it's also much longer, I think, than in the previous years. Could you just speak briefly about that?
Yeah, the biggest challenge in this global forum process that I think civil society has seen from the beginning, actually even in the early days when the global forum was trying to be born out of the high-level dialogue in 2006, was how civil society as co-responsible on these issues, and certainly first line on some of the problems, first experience of the suffering and success of migration has been to connect in with governments and other actors in a process that hasn't yet gone to full and most promising connection. The separation of the days still much too clear, even with some bridging. Again, credit to Mexico's Global Forum bringing in the common space, but an expansion over the years, slowly. But again this year, with Sweden significantly adding to the time of common space where all of civil society is with governments on Wednesday. Significant expansion of activity before and after the global forums where civil society is in the room with governments, sometimes very focused in much more time on some of these issues, like post-2015 development in Dhaka just last week. 9 or 10 of civil society, 2 full days with governments, looking quite properly, not in a round table, separate, not in our own working session, separate, but together, 2 full days on the issue, connecting there. That's what we have to look at and value. And the more we value that and what comes from it, the more we'll realize that this particular week doesn't have to be so separate.
It's an important point that common space is throughout the year in various different places. I'd also like to ask you about this new civil society network for migration and development called MADE. There's an event that's going to be launching the network today. Can you explain to us what the added value of the network is amongst the many initiatives that civil society has in a nutshell?
Yeah, in a nutshell. Thanks, Michelle. Yeah, the Migration and Development Network, or networking, the acronym MADE, comes from Migration and Development. It's a thank God, it's a multi-year initiative that we've been lucky to put together with partners in this movement around the world with funding from the European Commission largely, quite a substantial co-funding responsibility on civil society, but a multi-year, three-year resource for civil society to network itself. It's not a new network, it's a new networking. The whole idea that the funding stream was to strengthen civil society. And ICMC, working with the International Steering Committee 2 years ago, started framing this approach, this project proposal for funding. And what it does is, quite intentionally, looks to strengthen civil society in this movement, connect civil society in this movement, where we've all been trying to much more and hoping to succeed much better. So specifically at regional levels, with a great focus on Africa, on Asia, on Latin America, and the Caribbean. So some regional working groups for 3 years with some of the leading organizations in this room and in the People's Global Action and at the World Social Forum, all of the leading processes around the world. Thematic focus on labor migration, for example, on diaspora and development, for example, on global governance, for example. Some of the tough issues in the 5-year 8-point plan, saying these are tough issues and we need time at it and we work together at it and here's a project to do it together.
Thank you very much, John.
Sorry, Michelle.
No problem. Thank you very much. I think also just to mention that you've kind of introduced MADE, but MADE has a number of points, I think, in our agenda where we'll hear a little bit more about it. There's a side event at lunchtime and then a launching at the end of the day. So even if you couldn't really describe it much now, others will be doing that as well at different points. I'd like to lastly welcome Berenice Valdez from el Instituto para las Mujeres en la Migración. And Bernice will actually speak in Spanish, so if you want to get your headphones ready for those of you who will need it. Berenice, you work in Mexico and Central America, and I'd like to ask, you're bringing a different perspective here, which is more of a regional perspective, which is very much welcome when we're looking at all of these movement-building initiatives of civil society. So in your region, in Central America and Mexico, there has been a lot of movement. There has been a lot of civil society organizing on migration and development. What are some of the main concerns for you in your region? I see that some people are getting headsets, so maybe... we'll go ahead.
I can talk a little more.
We'll go ahead,
Gracias.
Berenice. Yes.
We have to start at 10.
Bueno, primero quiero agradecer la oportunidad de estar aquí. Pensamos que es importante dar a conocer qué nos preocupa en la región de Centro, Norte, América y el Caribe. Estoy orgullosa de poder hablar a través de las diferentes redes que conformamos el colectivo para las migraciones en las Américas. Un colectivo que ha sido apoyado por MAID para tener nuestro tercer encuentro transnacional. Y parte de las preocupaciones han sido ya comentadas por ti, Michelle, y por los demás, y una de las más fuertes es cómo hacemos para que todas las urgencias, las crisis humanitarias que vivimos con la población en la movilidad, mujeres, niñas, niños, familias enteras, que se están moviendo diariamente en todo el corredor de Centroamérica, México, el Caribe y Estados Unidos, tengan condiciones dignas. Tengan condiciones dignas para poder elegir si quieren quedarse en sus lugares de origen, pero también para poder viajar, poder migrar con dignidad si así lo deciden, ¿no? La migración en América no es nueva, ni en la región tampoco. Lo que nos ha afectado más ahora no es que haya crecido el número de población migrante, son las políticas restrictivas de la región, ¿no?, que impactan en la vulnerabilidad de las personas migrantes. Y las más de 80 organizaciones y redes de esta región que conformamos el colectivo para las Américas, queremos puntualizar que no es un problema la persona migrante. El problema es que no se toma en cuenta a las personas en las migraciones para la definición de políticas públicas a nivel nacional, ni tampoco en la agenda internacional, ¿no? Sí ha habido avances y lo reconocemos, pero no es suficiente para las urgencias que tenemos en la región. Diariamente mueren personas, ¿no?, migrantes, tratando simplemente de tener una movilidad en el continente que además es histórica, ¿no? No solamente las personas migrantes están padeciendo estos impactos, también sus familias en las comunidades que están en extrema pobreza, en contextos de violencia, y todo esto porque no ha habido una capacidad del Estado de poder atender las condiciones en el origen y también en el destino. Y aquí quiero puntualizar algo que a veces en los espacios internacionales no se toca mucho, que son las condiciones en el tránsito. Porque el tránsito puede durar desde un día hasta 2 años, ¿no? Y es diferenciado dependiendo entre las mujeres, entre las niñas, los niños, los hombres. Entonces, un llamado que hacemos desde esta región americana, latinoamericana, es pensemos en las necesidades diferenciadas, ¿no? Recordemos que el Estado tiene la responsabilidad, tiene la estructura, tiene los recursos para implementar condiciones de dignidad. La dignidad no es negociable, ¿no? Y lo que nosotros y nosotras estamos haciendo como sociedad civil es tener esa corresponsabilidad, ¿no? Pero tenemos que trabajar en esa unión y tenemos, como decía William, que aterrizarlo concretamente, ¿no? Toda esta realidad es tan abrumadora, ¿no? Comentaban los compañeros y las compañeras de Libia de las muertes recientes. En esta región diario tenemos decenas de muertes, de secuestros, no solamente contra las familias y las personas migrantes, sino contra las defensores y defensores de derechos humanos de migrantes. Hace menos de 3 semanas, compañeros de casas de migrantes fueron golpeados por agentes de migración y por Policía Federal por querer acompañar a migrantes en tránsito pacíficamente en una caravana. Entonces, uno de los retos más grandes y de nuestras preocupaciones es cómo podemos atender lo urgente, ¿no?, porque es una crisis humanitaria, ¿no?, pero también poder atender lo estructural con los gobiernos a mediano y a largo plazo, y creo que estamos teniendo bastantes avances en ese sentido, ¿no? Entonces, bueno, hay mucho más que comentar, ¿no? Pero dejaría en este momento la reflexión en cómo podemos aterrizar estas políticas, ¿no? En el impacto y también en la participación de la sociedad civil, ¿no? Yo veo muy positivo y vemos muy positivo el Foro Mundial Global, ¿no? Que está habiendo más participación de sociedad civil con gobiernos, pero queremos también que en la parte donde los gobiernos se sientan, ¿no?, se tomen las decisiones conforme a lo que hemos platicado y que el día de mañana no haya una sesión separada, sino que podamos hacer política conjunta y corresponsable, porque eso es política pública, ¿no?, desde una visión de derechos humanos, inclusión social y desarrollo integral.
Muchas gracias, Berenice.
Gracias, Michelle.
I think that you've made some important key points. One is also questioning this issue of transit, and this is not only the Americas, but something that we've also seen in North Africa, as many sub-Saharan migrants move through North Africa towards Europe. Many of these countries are also no longer becoming transit, and I think this whole issue of transit we also have to question and analyze, because as you say, you can be in transit for 1 to 30 years. When is actually transit, and what is transit? And is this also a way of evading sometimes looking at what policies need to be made? We need to also look at the urgent, pressing issues on the day-to-day basis. There was a migrant leader at the PGA who's of Turkish background from the Netherlands, who told us at the PGA, I'm Turkish and I've been looking at this issue for 30 years, but now I want some practical suggestions. What are we actually doing about this? Because this is what the problems that I see in my community. And I think especially, and this is how I'd like to end this session, because I think it's once again part of our framing. Migrants are not the problem. Migration is not necessarily the problem. How are we framing this? Migrants are part of the solution, and they also need to be taken in consideration in a number of public policy areas to mainstream the issues concerning migrants. I'd like to thank all of our session here once again. We have to move on to the next session, so unfortunately we can't take questions from the floor here because the minister is here with us but has to leave very promptly for a meeting. But we will have another plenary session after his speech where we can also have some interaction with the floor. I'd like to invite those here to stay here on the panel with us. So I'd like to warmly welcome Minister Tobias Billström to come up to the platform. I don't know where he
Right
is.
in front, Michelle.
Ah, sorry. Thank you. Say it for me. Oh, yeah, it's okay. So Mr. Tobias Billström is the official GFMD chair for Sweden, together with his colleague Minister Engström for international development cooperation. We'd like to thank Mr. Billström for coming here, for joining us. We know that you're busily preparing for the next days. We hope that you've had a chance to listen a little bit to this panel. We very much look forward to the interaction together on Wednesday and would like to welcome you now.
Thank you very much, Michelle. Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for the opportunity to speak at this plenary. As Sweden's chairmanship of the Global Forum on Migration and Development draws to a close, it's an opportunity to recognize how far we have come together. The GFMD is a unique state platform for informal, non-binding exchange of experiences. A key feature is the consultative process that allows for exchange of ideas between states and civil society stakeholders across geographic regions. Through the GFMD, the relationship between states and civil society has matured. We have become partners, often with shared goals, and many of these are echoed in the civil society's 5-year 8-point action plan. And I want to take a moment to reflect on this partnership and how it is manifested in what we have achieved together these past 18 months. Sweden has had three key priorities for our chairmanship. The first has been greater policy coherence on migration. And during Sweden's chairmanship of the GFMD, states, civil society, and international organizations collaborated to prepare for the UN high-level dialogue on migration and development. And we've also been involved in preparations for the Cairo 20+ International Conference on Population and Development. As partners, we have worked hard to ensure that the post-2015 International Development Agenda recognizes migration as a driving force for inclusive human development. And increasingly, that same message is echoed by governments and the broader international community around the world, a fact acknowledged by the UN Secretary General when he recognized the importance of the GFMD process and called for migration to be included in the post-2015 development agenda at the high-level dialogue in New York last year. A second priority for the Swedish chair has been to harness migration for economic development through better skills matching, engaging the private sector in discussions on migration policy, and to acknowledge the economic contributions of the diaspora. During the chairmanship of ours, we have engaged civil society, governments, international organizations, and the private sector to encourage an exchange of views, to appreciate what is working, and to understand what can be improved. Our ambition has been to use that knowledge to build more trust, stronger process and systems that not only facilitate protection for vulnerable migrants, but also to create the synergies necessary for inclusive development. A third priority has been to harness migration for inclusive social development. As chair of the GFMD, Sweden has actively reached out to diaspora organizations globally to ensure that migrants themselves have a voice and that they are empowered to act. It is important to give migrants an expert voice on issues that directly affect them. And their input is needed, it is necessary, as they have added advantage of speaking from both country of origin and destination perspective. In this respect, it has been encouraging to see that the role and importance of diasporas was center stage at the IOM's conference last year. Members of the diaspora has also been invited to address the UN high-level dialogue and the GFMD thematic meetings. As chair, Sweden has seized the opportunity not only to engage globally on migration and development issues, which has been a priority for us for many years. We have also seen this as an opportunity to discuss the development impact of migration at home. In Sweden, we have collaborated with civil society in a seminar series in the capital, the far north and west of the country, to inform and to initiate a dialogue connecting discussions about migration and integration with the global debate on migration. We have provided support to the African diaspora in Sweden, Norway, Finland, and Denmark to form the first Nordic working group on migration and development, which will be launched tomorrow on May the 13th. Their objective as members of the diaspora is to positively influence the migration debate in home and host countries by raising awareness about migrants as social and economic entrepreneurs. In addition, we felt the absence of a youth perspective in our discussions on migration. Youth statistically are more likely to move than adults, and with growing youth populations in emerging countries and economies and the global south, we wanted to involve young people as partners in our dialogue. We joined forces with the UNICEF, Fryshuset, and the National Council of Swedish Youth Organizations, and as a result, the Sweden Youth Group on Migration and Development was formed. Of the 20 youths representing an ethnically diverse group, 6 has been selected to participate during the breakout sessions in the common space. And this pilot initiative has been a rewarding experience for us as we begin to see our world through their eyes and the opportunities that they see through mobility. At the same time, young people's engagement for human rights protection and solidarity with more vulnerable groups reminds us all as governments and as adults of the responsibilities that we share when we ensure that when people move, they should do so because they want to, and it should be without risk of their lives or to the lives of their loved ones. We have worked to strengthen the development focus of the GFMD discussions by encouraging the engagement of development practitioners, both in the government part and in the civil society part of the GFMD process. As an example, we initiated an expert network globally made up of academics and policy practitioners to seek their input into our background papers. And we launched an online discussions with experts. Our aim was to broaden the involvement of civil society and academia with policy practitioners at the national level. Our joint efforts resulted in a greatly expanded database, as well as creating opportunities for national level dialogues between different sectors. Cognizant of the importance of common space while being mindful of the need for states to have opportunities for interaction amongst themselves, we have strengthened the format of common space and increased the time allotted this year. And we hope that this extended session will result in greater opportunities for interaction between states, civil society, and private sector participants. It is clear now, after 8 years of working together, that we all care greatly that migration and mobility is acknowledged as a driver of development. We may come at this from different angles, but we can all agree that migration and mobility is important from the perspective of individuals, states, and private sectors' interests. Taking our different perspectives as a starting point and acknowledging that this is a strength, I believe that we can now move forward together nationally as well as internationally to address the challenges that remain. This week of the Global Forum is a culmination of months of work between civil society, international organizations, and governments to improve the global governance of migration and to harness the economic and social development potential that migration offers. And these are important matters that must be given proper space for a balanced discussion. In this room, we need to stand together on the important issues. We have come this far together because we have been able to develop a shared vision. Often we have similar goals. Even if our processes sometimes differ, they are complementary and compelling enough to make change happen. The clearest evidence of this is how our priorities aligned for the high-level dialogue last year, when the call for migration in the post-2015 International Development Agenda was echoed by governments and civil societies alike. And this is our joint success. After our chairmanship, Sweden will continue to work together with all GFMD stakeholders as part of a troika and as a committed participant in the GFMD process. I feel privileged that Sweden has had the opportunity to share the GFMD this defining moment in time. So many international processes have converged to shine a spotlight on human mobility and international development. It is an honor to have worked together with all of you to unlock the enabling effects of migration and development. Sweden welcomes a continued close and constructive collaboration with civil society to ensure that the gains that we have made, the relationships that we have built, and the needs that we have acknowledged remain the focus of our work going forward. I wish you all the best for a fruitful discussion and look forward to welcoming you at the opening ceremony and common space on Wednesday. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Billström. Thank you. I'd like to now welcome our next panel onto the stage and once again thank those who participated in the movements and momentum. A round of applause, please. And I'd like to hand it over to Jibril now, who will be chairing the next session.
Yes, thank you very much, Michelle. If I can please invite Gregory Maniatis, Fatuma Farah, Ignacio Paca, and Per Olaf Shaw to join us here on the platform.
Thanks.
Sure. Please.
How are
Thank you.
Yeah, you too.
So, Per Olaf? Oh,
Thanks,
great,
this is good.
We've not met before.
Do you need one?
Yes, you can sit there.
Per Olaf. Nice to meet you.
Per Olaf? Yes. Okay, his surname is Shah. Yes. Shah. Okay, please. Okay. Yes. Fatima?
Good to see you again. Hi.
And I think Gregory would join us in a minute or two.
This is Gregory.
Sorry, Gregory is here. Ignacio Parker
I
is
am.
downstairs.
He's just getting
He'll
his
join us in
microphone.
a minute or two. Thank you very much, the audience. I think we're beginning to sort of see the setting of the scene. In the earlier session, William, Jilly, and John sort of gave a bit of background as to the movements we've made so far and hinted as to where we can go. But Berenice was very specific in showing the areas of gaps, of urgent gaps. And we heard the minister give a very powerful presentation of practical actions that Sweden as a country have taken for the country of Sweden and some of the things they've done on a global basis. That sort of leads us naturally to this panel, which is looking at what can be done at a global level within the context of the post-2015 development, debate, negotiation, and settlement. For this format, our guests would have the chance to make a short presentation of 3 to 5 minutes, and then we can have a discussion. We might have time for 2 to 3 questions from the floor if the time allows us. Can I begin by asking Gregory Maniatis, who is the special advisor to Sir Peter Sutherland, who is the UN Special Representative to the Secretary General on International Migration, to make his presentation. Thank you.
Thank you. And thanks to my fellow panelists and to you for indulging me for more than 3 to 5 minutes, if you don't mind, because I've been asked to set the stage of the post-2015 debate. So I would like to give you some background on that. First of all, I'm honored to be here representing Peter Sutherland, the UN Special Representative for Migration. I feel, looking around the room, that I am among friends, which is, I don't think, something that we would have easily said maybe 7 years ago as Peter's representative. Things have changed. Over time, I think that all of you have become clearer on what Peter's intentions are as special representative, and we have gained a deeper understanding of what civil society is all about. And knowing that, I think it's clear that our goals, Peter's goals, dovetail with your goals as well. You're the pioneers and the warriors in a series of issues that Peter champions, from the Domestic Workers Convention to decriminalizing migration offenses to banning the detention of migrant children. In fact, now whenever we consider a new initiative, the first call that we make tends to be to Michelle or Jabril or Colin or William or John, and we find that we are relying on you to guide us. It was in Mauritius a year and a half ago approximately that we first had our initial consultations on, for instance, the issue of recruitment costs and the recruitment process. with you, and that's an issue as a result of, in part, those deliberations that has risen up the international agenda, and I understand was a significant part of your deliberations at the People's Global Action this past weekend, which was very well attended. We also, as soon as the session is over, will have conversations with several of you regarding banning the detention of migrant children, which is an issue that Peter is very keen to pursue. In fact, I think Peter agrees with pretty much every single point in your 5-year plan. And that brings me to our most immediate issue, which is the post-2015 UN Development Agenda. And I wanted to share the logic with you that Peter has of trying to ensure that migration is included in that agenda. Here's the most basic reason for it. We want to change how people perceive migrants and migration. Far too often you, are perceived as scourges, as something negative, rather than what migrants really are, which is the greatest agents of human development in the world. We want also to make people understand that migration is the original survival strategy for people seeking to escape poverty, mitigate risk, and pursue a better life. So that's the first reason. Here's the second reason. We want to generate the political will and resources that we need to address the most immediate and urgent challenges we face. For instance, ensuring that decent work conditions and fair pay, and making sure that the public is on our side on those issues. The post-2015 development debate, as arcane and Byzantine as it sometimes seems, I'm Greek, so I can recognize Byzantine, is where the political will and resources are concentrated now. If we're absent from that debate, or if we're present in an ineffectual or a fragmented way, we will actually do harm to our overarching goal, which is to create a safe and fair international migration system that protects migrant rights and that benefits all of our societies. 2 years ago, when we began to this campaign, we knew there would be opposition. Marine Le Pen and Geert Wilders and their like from around the world were not attending our strategy sessions. But we also encountered some unexpected resistance. It turns out that many very well-intentioned people think of migration as a shortcoming of development. Among some old-school development professionals, emigration signified the failure of their efforts. So they had a knee-jerk reaction against the idea of including migration in the post-2015 agenda. But that view ignores that migration remains the most effective survival strategy we know. We should not be in favor of trapping people in terrible conditions. People should always have the right to move within systems of migration that are fair, regular, and orderly. We also heard other fears, for instance, about brain drain, or that migrant remittances would somehow be claimed as foreign assistance and thus diminish the need for ODA. Sometimes these arguments even felt a little bit like friendly fire, taken from our own forces, or worse, they were cynically turned against us by people who claimed or who opposed migration for all the wrong reasons. That's not to say that we want to soft pedal the dark side of migration. In fact, we want to do exactly the opposite. We want to shine a very bright light on that dark side. It's precisely because so much migration unfolds in ways that violate the rights of migrants and that fail to compensate countries that lose valuable workers. It's for that very reason that we want migration in the post-2015 agenda. By naming the problems, focusing attention on them, and working together to develop solutions, only in that way can we make the world a safer place for migration. So, Peter set out to accumulate the evidence about how migration impacts development. It's been his fervent mission for 2 years, and quite honestly, there have been moments when the outcome of it was neither certain nor clear. I won't take you all the way back to 2000, at the birth of the original MDGs, to explain why they did not include migration. It was a different era then, before the field of migration and development really emerged. But even when we conceived the Global Forum in 2006, there was skepticism about migration being linked to development. We overcame that resistance, and we will overcome the resistance to migration in the post-2015 debate. In fact, to a great degree, we already have. We've been surprised by the sheer number of countries that have spoken out in favor of migration at the high-level dialogue in October, and now during the post-2015 consultations in New York City. I think they are doing this because they recognize that the post-2015 agenda offers us a unique opportunity to design concrete, practical, measurable ways to reduce the human, social, and economic costs of migration. We need to underscore to the drafters of the post-2015 agenda that migration is one of the most powerful and immediate strategies to escape poverty and conflict, adapt to environmental and economic shocks, seek protection as asylum seekers and refugees, and improve the income, health, and education of families. Migration has already contributed, and I won't go through the details, to the achievement of the original MDGs. By improving the safety and quality of movement now, we can improve human development outcomes for migrants, their families, local communities, and states. The policies that could be advocated in the context of the post-2015 agenda can play a critical role in a whole series of goals that we have. Lowering the social and financial costs of migration and remittances, expanding the portability of pensions and the recognition of qualifications, assisting and protecting victims of human trafficking, providing third country resettlement options for refugees, safeguarding the human rights of migrants, reducing the costs of migration more generally. How migration is governed, the conditions under which migrants move, live, and work, will determine what kind of development outcomes can be achieved. Think for a moment about a signal policy and market success story from the past decade. The reduction in remittance costs from almost 15% about in 2000 to a weighted average of less than 7% today. It's still far too high, especially in parts of Africa. It should be zero. But by cutting costs in half over the past decade or so, nearly $35 billion additional dollars reach some of the neediest families on earth. In Bangladesh, just to give an example, just 13% of households that receive remittances are below the poverty line versus 34% that do not receive remittances and thus are above the poverty line. In some corridors, remittance cost almost nothing to send as a result of determined effort by policymakers and by the private sector. There is no reason why this number should not be zero everywhere, which means another $35 billion ending up in the pockets of those in the developing world. And there's lots of other ways to reduce financial costs for migrants as well. Fixing remittances is just one challenge we face. For instance, there's no good reason why countries of origin cannot protect the fundamental rights of their workers abroad. They can make a better effort with the help of the countries of destination. It's not acceptable that only about 20 to 25% of international migrants can go home with the social security benefits that they have earned. Some countries do a very good job of protecting those workers, and 80 to 85%, for instance, of Moroccans and Turks who work abroad come home with social security benefits. That should be the standard. And the lives of migrants should never be in jeopardy. The post-2015 agenda can help us mobilize the resources to begin building a system of human mobility that responds to the realities of the 21st century. We'll get there one way or another, but gaining a foothold for migration in the post-2015 agenda will get us there faster. So this brings me to what we specifically aim to achieve. In the language of the post-2015 agenda, we'd like to see a series of targets and indicators related to migration. Ones that, for instance, can measure and compel the reduction in the costs of migration, for instance, remittances and recruitment costs, and that track whether migrants are given fair treatment in labor markets, in schools, and in the healthcare system. We've been impressed by the seriousness with which you've gone about thinking about your own and civil society's own ideas about goals, targets, and indicators. If we manage to pursue this together and succeed, then greater financial and political resources will flow to address the challenges that I outlined. So where do we stand? Migration today is in a far better position than anyone expected even a few months ago. The government group, the Open Working Group overseeing the debate, has now heard from dozens of countries in support of migration. And the main document being discussed, the Focus Areas document, now includes several references to migration. But those are not necessarily going to stay there. Migration stakeholders have rallied over the past 24 months, and we're making our case forcefully in New York City. We've had the high-level dialogue declaration. There was the DACA declaration from last year and the recommendations from DACA earlier this month. The IOM Council issued a statement in support of post-2015 and migration's inclusion, and the Secretary General will issue a report soon that will also make the case for migration in the post-2015 agenda. That will be released in the fall. But we do need to reach further and faster into capitals. We need you to act. The real battle on post-2015 starts now, and a year-long campaign lies ahead. Peter is committed to working tirelessly on this. He is speaking with ministers, with the Secretary General, with everyone who will listen to him, his wife, his children, pretty much every day. And he will be here tomorrow in the closing session to speak with you as well about post-2015. And he is looking forward to working with you. He has had a group of states and civil society representatives and others who he's worked with for the past 2 years to try to advance this goal of getting migration in the post-2015 agenda, and we hope that more of you will join us as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Gregory, for giving us a historic and policy context of the post-2015 discussions and the evolution of the nexus between migration and development, the specific gains that have been made in the past 6-7 years. And now to concentrate our minds on, as you put it, concrete, practical, and measurable targets and indicators. Can I now invite Fatuma Farah, who is the director of Kimilo Relief and Development Association, HIRDA, to give us her perspective from a diaspora development point of view. Fatuma.
Thank you. Thank you very much giving me opportunity to present a case of Somalia, actually. We were talking and talking and talking, but my presentation is practical. What a diaspora means for development. So I've got this picture. It is amazing what migrant brings. That is very, very amazing to see this picture. But also I've done also fact sheet of the diaspora contribution to the development. And it is known, everybody knows what a diaspora contribution is. I'm just repeating this fact sheet. We have a positive impact in our country. And I'm going to show you what we have started. I'm diaspora, I'm living in the Netherlands almost 20 years. And what we have done for many, many Somalis and also some East Africans to change their lives, I'll give you some film that you might be inspired. Thank you.
Since its collapse in 1991, Somalia has not had an effective central government. Social welfare and access to basic rights hardly exist in the country. Thousands of Somalis have fled the country in the last decades. Somali refugees live all over the world and form a significant diaspora movement. Many have a strong desire to support their home countries. This is why HIRDA started. HIRDA's been building schools in the ghetto region since 2000. They built a primary school in the Bardera district and did the same 2 years later in Abu Dhabi and the Galgudud region. In this way, they experienced the benefits of education firsthand. This is a motivation for parents to send their children to school. Primary education program is for children between 6 and 14. With this program, HIRDA improves their chances for a better future.
How many of them are there and sitting down? 3 of them are sitting down.
waxaan ku bilownay 3 fasal iyo 4taas macallin iyo kuraas la'aan kadib waxaa bilaabatay markaas Oxfam Novi markii ay gacan siisay in waxbarashadii ay hana qaado oo iskuulada si tarbataan ilaa ay ka gaaraan 2672 arday oo isugu jira wiilal iyo gabdho.
Somalian healthcare leaves a lot to be desired, and this is where Herda steps in with a training program. The program gives graduates the knowledge they need to assist at times of emergencies, natural disasters, and outbreaks of diseases.
waxaan ka baxay iskuulka caafimaadka ee Hirda oo ka qaatay shahaado ardayda ka baxday shahaadada waxay u baahan yihiin waxyaabo badan sida buugaag ay ka tixraacaan casharada caafimaadka sida laboratory u gaar ah caafimaadka.
Herda is also very busy to educate the women about the consequences of female genital mutilation, or FGM. Herda's Women Empowerment Center also gives microcredit loans to vulnerable women so they can set up their own businesses.
magacayga waxaa la yiraahdaa Xaliimo Cabdullaahi Buure deemanka waxaa la siiyay sanadkii hore
aniga magacayga waa Idil Cali Gaas deentana waxaa qaadanaya hooyada la jecel warsame.
Peace and human rights awareness are vital to development. Herda organizes community events like an emergency and peace conference. People have discussions on how to enforce human rights, how to deal with conflict management, to reconcile their clan and have an open discussion on gender issues. Because of the effort of the Dutch office, Herda was able to grow to its current size and success in Somalia. However, Herda faces several challenges. The needs in Somalia are far bigger than Herda's project can help lift. There's almost never enough capacity, equipment, and funding. What Herda needs now most is sustainability. All Herda staff members, both in Somalia and in the Netherlands, are very committed. Together, they are dedicated to development by sharing.
Okay, thank you very much for this film. Why am I presenting this film is to show what is the contribution of the diaspora to the development, actually. And that is what we are contributing. We have changed the lives of a lot of Somali people. Children who are graduated our schools are now working for international NGOs. They are graduated, they are participating in politics. And that is our contribution. That is not always seen in the MDGs and also policy papers. And even though the discussion now going on of sustainable development goals, what we need is we have some recommendations. Those recommendations are the role of the diaspora and migrant development should be included as a prominent feature in post-2000 agenda. And that is not the case now, maybe it is mentioned, but we need very concrete to have diaspora organization and diaspora contribution in the development agenda, sustainable and the new goals, the sustainable development agenda. The diaspora and migrants should be formally, distinctly recognized and mentioned as an important global partner for development in line with other partners, locally, nationally, and internationally. Because internationally, we saw that the papers are written, but we are not really included in the policy papers. So what we need is to be in the policy papers, in the consultations, in the policy making, and other informing policy. Positive nexus between migration and sustainable development should be included, prominent feature in any post-2015. That's what I'm talking now. And migration should be rightfully recognized as an option and choice for people across the world as a significant factor in global development. That is our message, and we need to work together to have nationally, because we can talk global forum for migration and development, but what we advocate is to come together as a migrant in a country or for hosting country to make the five-year action plan, to make work and to make locally and to translate with the policy in the national country that we are staying. So thank you very much. That's my message, and I hope that I inspire you. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Fatuma. I think the film and presentation is very inspiring, practical, specific examples of the role of the diaspora, health, education, and the further things we need in post-2015. Can I now invite Ignacio Paca, the Secretary General of Terre des Hommes, for his presentation.
Thank you, Jibril. I don't have much time. In less than 40 years, I would have finished my terrestrial life. Short path, a long road. Gregory Magnatis, that was very special. Thanks for this intervention. And as you said, well, you talked about 2 years ago, I was going to refer 1 year ago, migration barely figured in the conversation of post-2015. And you shared some of the progress made. With a strong acceleration, evidence and arguments have been developed for why migration, when it takes place in a safe, orderly, and responsible way, contributes powerfully to countries of origin and destination, how it contributes to the families of migrants. Today, we have come quite a distance in raising awareness about migrants as agents of development. And from the start of the discussion on post-2015, civil society organizations have been advocating on essential benchmarks, principles for the post-2015, such as human rights, universality, inequality, sustainability, accountability and participation. And these principles are for all, whether you're a migrant, part of diaspora, or you have had the choice not to move. Many of us in civil society voice the insufficient place for the issue of inequalities in the present discussion on post-2015. It is still not being addressed head-on. It's embedded somewhere in there. This is not enough. And it is a major concern, and of course, not only for migration and migrants. The work on post-2015 is now more technical. It's working on targets and indicators, but we should keep giving voice to vision. The world's wealthiest people aren't known for traveling by bus or by inflatable boats. No. But if they fancied a change of scene, then the richest 85 people on the globe, who between them control as much wealth as the poorest half of the global population put together, could squeeze onto a single double-decker. And if we cross this data that comes from Oxfam with the recent data of the World Bank, we realize that those richest 85 people across the globe share a combined wealth equal to 800 times the total yearly earnings of all migrants, or almost 3,000 times the total remittances we keep on talking about. So where does the vision of a more equitable world also stand? The fight against poverty cannot be won until wealth inequality has been tackled. Without a concerted effort to tackle inequality, the cascade of privilege and of disadvantages will continue down the generations, and including also, of course, to many migrants. $40 billion additional dollars, or $35 billion additional dollars, reaching some of the neediest families on earth due to the reduction or suppression in remittance costs are necessary, but very far from sufficient. These additional dollars are, comparatively to the double-decker, crumbs. But these crumbs from the top table, these crumbs usually are left for classic development expenses in families like food, education, and housing. They are small but necessary contribution to justice in putting the crooked middlemen out of business so that workers can take home what they earn. But more is needed. The civil society blueprints, which you have in your folder, the civil society blueprint of goals, targets, and indicators takes up the strong convergence among governments, international organizations, and civil society to include migrants and migration in the new post-2015 development agenda. It's a consolidation of civil society inputs. And the blueprint picks up directly from the 5-year 8-point action plan, from the high-level dialogue declaration, from the system-wide support by the United Nations from the state-led global experts meetings that have been going on. With suggestions on targets and indicators, the blueprint recognizes the fact that migrants fill vital labor market gaps and that they bring valuable skills, knowledge, and networks to their countries of origin. It focuses on targets to pursue policies aimed at ensuring that more funds reach poor families and that labor market function properly while working to protect migrants' rights and prevent discrimination. Last week, and actually it ended on Friday in New York, during the 11th session of the Open Working Group, which was mentioned early on, obviously migration remained an issue, but still struggling for space. Amongst other concerted efforts, the Dhaka recommendations of the expert meeting convened by Bangladesh and Switzerland on migration and post-2015 2 weeks ago has played its role with government delegations at the Open Working Group consolidating around migration elements. But let's not drop the ball. We still have a long way to go, and we still have a very steep part of the hill to climb. And there's not much time, I remind you. Over the years, civil society has changed its way of working from, sometimes a bit kind of shopping list of recommendations that we present to states. We now follow an action plan for collaboration, and we do our utmost to advocate more strategically. We want the short path for the long road. As civil society, in the coming months, we should increase the dialogue on post-2015 at national level. We're on good track, avoiding fragmentation of efforts, sharing roles, building alliances with technical teams on post-2015, such as in the informal post-2015 working group convened by Mr. Sutherland. Creating new spaces to dialogue, not only with government representatives, but where power relies. As civil society organizations, our role is also to confront citizens by giving a human face to the discussions, not only positions. What will move member states and make them act are the raw voices of their citizens. And that is where us as civil society organizations, we have to increasingly engage. We want to change how people see migrants and migration. As civil society organizations, our work at national level on the post-2015 is timely and crucial. As citizens, we are to talk daily in our communities. Agreeing the goal areas, targets, and indicators is a challenge in itself, but harder still will be securing the necessary commitments from governments and other actors and make them accountable for the post-2015 implementation. Beyond post-2015, we have the implementation and we have a very long ride together. Not once did I speak about children on the move. Unusual for me, working for a child rights organization and also behind a Destination Unknown campaign, a campaign on the children on the move. But the effects of the issues discussed in the post-2015 go on children and the future generations. And in just this morning's session, I heard on 2 occasions, just in the 2.5 hours we've had, the importance of ending child immigration detention as a post-2015 target with a measurable indicator. I didn't say it. I will end by giving a human face to my intervention, and I go back to asking Farah, who's an 18-year-old Somali refugee in Malta. He arrived by boat last year. I asked him why did he leave his beloved mother, his community? He answered by a question to my own question. He answered by a reflection. He said, you know, the cheapest round-trip airline ticket from Nairobi to London is $565 US. What in the world do you think would force children to spend thousands of dollars, risk their lives, be detained and brutalized to come to Europe? Children and families in the context of migration should be able to take the short path for the long road of life with the choice to remain at home or to move elsewhere. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ignacio. As usual, you've introduced a productive edge and equity to the proceedings, and I think your opulence express of 85 people in a double-decker is very powerful as a visualization of the level of challenge that we face. Which
it's not mine, it comes from Oxfam.
Oxfam, that's very powerful. And it reminds us that even on the areas that we have consensus on, there needs to be ambition in terms of what we request and what we need to agree on. It is now my pleasure to invite Per Olaf Scher, the president of the Building and Woodworkers International, to give us his presentation from a trade union perspective. Per Olaf.
Thank you very much. Just like Minister Billström, I'm also a Swedish citizen, and I'm very proud that we can host this very important forum in Stockholm this year. Actually, I would be even more proud if this forum would be a real and true step against the improvement of conditions of migrants all over the world. Actually, I would like to begin by reiterating an important problem facing trade unions, workers, and families everywhere, and that is jobs. Today, there are over 200 million people without jobs, and many of those who have jobs are in part-time contract, informal, irregular, temporary, and other forms of precarious employment. These are low-wage jobs that have no security and no social benefits. However, because of the rising unemployment rate, which is in some cases, such as Europe, now are in double digits, and the fear of being a part of the 900 million working poor, workers are forced to accept whatever job and wherever. Today, the reality of migration is that behind it is not merely freedom of choice and opportunity, but rather it's the lack of decent work at home, forcing people to leave their family, friends, and community to seek what they believe to be better jobs to provide a livelihood for their families. 90% of international migration today is about the search for decent jobs, decent work. I would also like to point out that due to the continuous ongoing global economic crisis in Europe and the euro crisis, workers in developed countries are increasingly migrating. And in this process, many migrants find themselves victims of unscrupulous recruiters and human traffickers. Enormous recruitment fees have resulted in migrants caught up in the cycle of debt bondage. Migrants who are promised high-paying jobs with decent living conditions find themselves in different jobs paying far less and crowded accommodation facilities. In the sectors that BWI represent, construction and wood and forestry, we know too well the high number of cases where workers find themselves exploited and in forced labor. In Russia, hundreds of Serbian workers who were part of the workforce in preparations for the Sochi Winter Olympics were not paid for several months and lived in squalid conditions. You know, even here in Sweden, where you for the next 2 days will hear about the Swedish model of migration as an enabler for development, there are cases of workers in forced labor. Last year, we had a case of workers from Cameroon who were forced to work under slave-like conditions in the Swedish forests. The workers were lured by an attractive job offer only to be forced to sign a new contract for much lower wages, which was insufficient to repay the debt they had taken to come to Sweden. When they protested to the employer, they and their families back in Cameroon were threatened. With the intervention of my union, GS, we were able to reach a settlement, and after months of waiting, the workers were able to receive wages and benefits in accordance to the collective agreement here in Sweden. This case highlighted the loopholes and problems with the labor immigration policy in Sweden, which too often can also be found elsewhere. I highlight this case to reiterate what the global trade union movement has been consistently advocating for in the discourse on global governance of migration since the first Global Forum on Migration and Development. We need to shift the paradigm to one where the approach to labor migration is about the human rights of workers and not a goal or an enabler for development. We need to push for stronger and real political commitment towards a multilateral governance of labor migration. We need to push governments to stop merely paying lip service when they state they are concerned about the welfare and rights of migrants and to ratify the UN and ILO conventions, which are a legal framework for a rights-based approach to migration. And we need to have an effective and transparent regulation and enforcement of bad employers, recruiters, traffickers, and smugglers. Currently, there is much debate on migration with the frame of the post-2015 development agenda. We, as representatives of trade unions who are organizing and campaigning to ensure migrant workers have decent work and basic fundamental rights, would like to add the following points to the discussion. As I said, a paradigm shift is needed. We need a new development agenda for an inclusive and sustainable development that delivers equity, social inclusion, structural transformation, and sustainable livelihoods, underpinned by a human rights-based approach, as well as on the principles of democratic ownership, accountability, and leadership. We need to realize that forced migration, when migrants risk their lives to find work and a better life elsewhere, is a failure of development. Inability to ensure decent work, provide social protection, and deliver quality public services is in essence a failure of development of the current global economic model. And migration is a cross-cutting issue which must be integrated within the 3 development goals that are critical for the trade union movement. And these are full employment and decent work for all, universal social protection, and gender equality. The post-2015 development agenda must aim for a holistic approach with a clear set of global and universal goals translated into national targets and indicators. In this, migration and migrant rights should be integrated into the target and indicators. Some of the targets that we believe can be incorporated in the decent work goal is as forth. Full and productive employment and decent work for all in origin as well as destination countries of migrant workers to ensure that workers migrate by choice and not out of necessity. Ensuring respect for rights at work for migrant workers. Ensuring access to social protection and income security for migrant workers and their families. Ensuring equal treatment and non-discrimination of migrant workers. Reducing vulnerable employment of migrant workers, reducing the number of migrant workers in poverty, ensuring effective social dialogue for migrant workers, ensuring decent working conditions for migrant workers, and minimum living wage coverage for migrant workers, and gender equality. With this, friends, I've tried to give an overview of the most important trade union perspectives. I thank you for the opportunity to address you.
Thank you very much, Per Olof, not only for highlighting the general approach for a human rights-based paradigm, but given specific examples of what can be done in post-2015 discussions. You have also highlighted the need to move forced migration, to see it indeed as a failure of development, but move the discussion from forced migration to general labor mobility as a norm. Ladies and gentlemen, we do have time for discussions. I would start by taking 3 questions from the floor, from the 3 sections, as it were. There should be a roving mic, and please, your questions, or comment, let it be precise and focused. On this very topic, post-2015, we do have the green room sessions going on during lunchtime and many more occasions to discuss it and interact. So on this side, can I take the question 1 at the back, here, 1 here at the front, and there at the back, 1 at the back there, yes. The roving mic at the back there. And please give your name and organization and a precise question or comment. And it can be addressed to any of our panelists. Thank you.
Good morning. Thank you very much. My name is Brenda King. I'm from the European Economic and Social Committee. And my question is, I mean, this has been a fabulous opening and a very good session, but I'm wondering why we haven't heard the private sector's voice in this opening. I think it's important to include them, so that's the question I have for the organizers. Thank you.
Thank you. 1 question here.
Sorry, you speak in French. Je voudrais parler en français si ça vous perturbe pas. Donc, ma première question, en fait, s'adresse au représentant, M. Peter-Sterland. C'est par rapport à tous ces expulsés, à tous ces migrants expulsés vers l'Afrique, vers l'Asie, vers l'Amérique latine et autres, qui ont quand même des biens qui sont restés dans les pays du Nord. Ça devient une question très critique parce que ces personnes sont dans une situation très critique dans leur pays d'origine. Ils sont expulsés sans leurs avoirs en banque, sans les cotisations sociales qu'ils ont cotisées dans les fonds, et ils sont dans une situation très précaire. On ne peut pas parler de l'après 2015 sans régler cette situation très préoccupante. Qu'en est-il actuellement? On est un forum pour pouvoir avancer sur ce sujet. Qu'en est-il actuellement? La deuxième question, c'est par rapport aux politiques migratoires. Actuellement, beaucoup de pays sont en train de développer des politiques migratoires, entre autres, mais ces politiques migratoires, malheureusement, suivent des volets sécuritaires. De plus en plus de volets sécuritaires, comme la criminalisation et autres. Quelle action on peut mener ici pour pouvoir mettre face à des politiques migratoires trop sécuritaires et qui sont carrément en faux par rapport aux questions de migration et développement? Merci.
One more question at the back there. The gentleman there. Yes.
So my name is Davis Tekuntala. I am representing here from the Berlin Integration and Immigration Advisory Council and also for the World Malayali Council's organization from India. I am an immigrant to Germany. My question is, in the Gulf countries, there are millions of guest laborers. I mean, from Somalia, Ethiopia, India, Bangladesh, Pakistan, all these countries, millions are working there, and the situation of these laborers is extreme critical. I don't know if there is existing any international labor organization or such a system. Maybe we can do something. This conference can initiate something for these millions of people.
Okay, thank you very much. Now, we would have time to take maybe a couple more. There's a specific question to Gregory, if you don't mind answering it. And this question about the Middle East, Urlof, perhaps you can answer that.
About the Gulf states?
Yes,
Yeah.
and this last question.
Yes.
Just before we go to that, there's a question about, just to say that the private sector participating throughout the sessions, the civil society days and the government days, but we would perhaps get ICMC to have the opportunity to explain a bit more. Gregory.
I don't know if I can answer that whole question, but I want to just take on one part of it and connect it to the post-2015 debate, which has to do with the question of the politics of migration and how those play out in the North. I think it's really very important to understand that one of the major reasons why migration politics are so negative right now in the North is that governments have run away from the issues. What's striking when you look at the polling data out of, for instance, Europe, is that European publics, even in the midst of the current populist, far-right resurgence, European publics are actually not against migration when it's legal. They are against the perception that governments have simply let the system go and are letting it be run by the smugglers who control the Mediterranean and by the recruiters and employers who take advantage of migrants. It is really striking to look at data that says that even in countries that have problems with immigrants right now in terms of the politics, that 60 or 70 or 80% of those people see migration as positive, see legal migration as something that's desirable. And interestingly, 3/4 of Europeans, more or less, don't see migrants as a cultural threat, which is one of the main ways that populist parties try to generate support. So I would just simply answer very broadly to you that if we can, through the post-2015 agenda, be able to generate a more positive image of migration, if we emphasize what it is that migrants contribute to both countries of origin and countries of destination, if that enables politicians to speak more positively themselves about migration, I think that we can make progress towards depoliticizing the issue.
Okay. Perolov?
Yeah, I can say something about the Gulf states. Of course, there is a specific problem there, and it's a huge development of migrating into the Gulf states. And just to add one example that we now see in that context, that the FIFA has decided that the World Cup in football will be held in Qatar 2022. And we are currently now working really hard to improve the situation for the migrant workers in Qatar. And you have to do that by interfering with different players, if I may say so. We are highlighting FIFA and the decision of FIFA and the responsibility to also include workers' rights into their bidding process. We address the government of Qatar, and we address the employers who are currently there to build all the arenas. But it's a real big job and a big problem, but we work really hard with that now, currently.
Okay. And I think reference to the ratification of the ILO convention is particularly important. Can we take 3 more questions? I'll start with one here, and the lady at the back there, and the lady here. Yeah, one here. No, at the back.
I have to speak in French. Non?
Yes.
Shkoun. Je vais parler en français. Je pense que cette session, elle est organisée dans un contexte qui est particulier. Ce n'est pas vraiment une session ordinaire. Et ce contexte particulier, je tiens vraiment à remercier Georges qui a ouvert cette session à partir d'une minute de silence à la mémoire de tous les disparus migrants à travers le monde. Et je pense qu'il ne faut pas qu'on oublie, lors de cette session et dans notre interpellation des États et des gouvernements, cette question fondamentale. Parce que nous savons très bien qu'il y a énormément de travaux, énormément de recommandations, énormément de choses sur lesquelles On a travaillé en tant que société civile et nous avons écrit, nous avons vraiment apporté. Mais il y a une chose fondamentale, actuellement, dans le contexte actuel, qui est seul du droit à la vie, et que, actuellement, cette question-là, elle est fondamentale. Il est nécessaire qu'on ait une capacité d'indignation. Peut-être des amis connaissent une mémoire, quelqu'un qui est formidable, Stéphane Hessel. Stéphane Hessel, c'est une sommité qui nous a quittés et qui a eu la capacité, à sa jeunesse, d'être l'un des rédacteurs de la Déclaration universelle des droits de l'homme de 1948 et aussi l'un des rédacteurs des recommandations du Conseil national de la résistance contre le nazisme à sa jeunesse. Et à la fin de sa vie, il a été en capacité de dire « indignez-vous ». Et nous avons le devoir d'indignation et de l'exprimer auprès de nos États, les différents États du monde, en tant que société civile. Et j'espère que notre présidente, qui sera notre porte-parole, pourra exprimer cette capacité d'indignation pacifique, mais ferme, pour dire « halte ». Il est nécessaire de revoir ces politiques qui sont menées actuellement, parce qu'elles mènent à des impasses. Et je crois que dans les interventions, énormément qui ont été très importantes, notamment Ignacio, qui a mis l'accent sur la question des inégalités actuelles dans le monde, sur la question aussi de la jeunesse. Notre devoir, c'est que cette jeunesse, il faut qu'on lui donne de l'espoir et pas du désespoir. Et je pense que ce message, il est important qu'il arrive aux États et au gouvernement. Merci.
Okay, thank you very much. Whilst we get the two other questions, one is the lady at the back. Perhaps if you can think of a response to that comment.
Hi, my name is Beshit Najafi. I am from Germany. I am a migrant woman in Germany, and I have an Iranian background. I live for more than 25 years in Germany, and I work at the Information and Counseling Center for Female Migrants and Refugees in Cologne. I am very happy to be here, and it is my first time to be at such a conference, and I try to learn from the other countries and to go back to Germany to implement there. So I'm very interested to know more about the Swedish law to healthcare for undocumented migrants, because it's actually I'm sad that the people must die, and after that then the law is in charge. But I'm happy that at least in Sweden there is such law, and I want to know who pays for this treatment. Is this it's local government, is city or it's state government, and how do they manage that the doctors don't call the police or to inform the authorities? I don't know. I am very interested to know more about the law, and I hope that we can implement in Germany too.
Thank you very much. We've got one question here, and Michelle, maybe you can respond to that. And after this lady, I would ask the representative of the government of Bangladesh to also make a comment.
Ok, je vais m'exprimer en français. Donc, mon nom est Annette Tinois. Je viens de la Belgique. Je dirige un mouvement qui est le collectif des femmes africaines du Hainaut. Voilà, je remercie tous les panélistes pour leur brillante intervention. J'ai le plaisir et vraiment la joie de participer à ce forum du Commonwealth pour la migration et le développement. Parce que, bon, je tiens à préciser le Commonwealth parce que nous avons écrit un plaidoyer sur la nécessité de la diversité dans cet engagement qui nous concerne tous, qui n'a pas reçu réponse auprès des organisateurs. Et ça, pour nous, c'est aussi une injustice. Depuis que j'assiste à ce forum, il y a des recommandations qui nous promettent un lendemain meilleur, donc le monde va changer, tout sera beau et merveilleux. Mais bon, tout ceci manque un peu de pratique. Ce n'est pas des actions avec 4 jours de forum qu'on va essayer de changer un système. Un système se change dans la durée et c'est avec des actions permanentes, jour après jour. Madame la directrice qui a son siège à Bruxelles, vous savez que la Belgique, où nous venons, a été désignée par l'Union européenne comme le mauvais élève de l'Union européenne en matière d'intégration et d'accueil des migrants. La Belgique radicalise son programme pour l'accueil des migrants. On assiste à la fermeture des centres d'accueil des demandeurs d'asile, les renvois systématiques dans les pays d'origine, sans que cela n'émeute personne. J'ai l'impression que l'une des volontés de ce forum, c'est de marcher main dans la main avec le gouvernement, ne pas fâcher personne. Je crois que ce n'est pas comme ça qu'on pourra changer le monde. Voilà ma question.
Okay. Thank you. Can I, the representative of the government of Bangladesh, where is that person? Yeah. Okay.
Thank you very much. Is the mic on? Yeah. Thank you very much, Jibril Fall, for this, for moderating this wonderful session. And I remember listening to you back in Dhaka 2 weeks before. You made a very eloquent intervention. Thank you for that as well. And it is good to see a lot of friends we have seen in Bangladesh and here as well, and in other areas that work on migration. I don't have any particular question, but I have some comments to make, if I may. I came here with an intention to listen to all these interventions and all the panelists, because I know that I will thereby enrich myself, but I couldn't but raise my hand to speak and comment and commend the interventions that you have made, as well as some very interesting questions and comments also from the floor. I just want to make one thing one comment about the discussions that is going on in post-2015 development agenda. Now, we have a number of focus areas there, as many of you has commented that rightfully, that yes, migration or migrants is pretty much absent there. This is the reason why we, along with Switzerland, had this meeting in Bangladesh to move people out of the rooms in New York and focus on migration so that we can have this in our future discussions in the context of the discussions, the open working group discussions that is going on post-2015 development agenda. One thing we find very much challenging is to how to frame it, because when we talk about particular goals, and specifically when it comes to the indicators, people tend to look for numbers, for statistics. And this is why we find that in many areas, the way the question of remittance has featured, the other questions, the very important questions that you have raised, and also has been raised in the morning session, cannot find much way there. I think what the civil society is doing is a very good work, and also the recommendations that you are mentioning. I think some of the recommendations I have just heard, I mean, I think that we can very well fit these into the focus areas back in New York. And we will certainly work on that with other countries that feel the same way back in New York. We will take it from here. But also what we need to see, and when you reformulate or when you formulate the recommendations, what you need to see is the goals and how that can fit into the indicators that will be coming up in the future discussions. And thereby we can learn from you, and we will certainly take it to New York. And Bangladesh is very much attached, and we attach our work very much to the work of the civil society on migration and migrants. And we look forward to do that, especially within the context of GFMD. We look forward to engage more with the GFMD, and we look forward to engage more with the civil society in our endeavors. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Now, as moderator, it is always our task to beg your forgiveness for our inability to call all of you who have very interesting and pressing things to say. I still have to run it on the time scale given to me, and I would hate to keep anyone away from lunch. So in terms of concluding, we are in the last 3 to 5 minutes. I would ask Ignacio and Fatima to make comments, and Michelle, there was a particular question. I'll end with you. Yeah, Ignacio.
Perhaps rapidly on two elements. One, it depends on the micro. Okay. Yeah, thanks. Two elements. One is on alignment, and the other one on time and disruption. And it goes in the line what you said. It's not because we have positions at meetings that we don't speak to people. And that is our role as a citizen, but also as organizations that we lead back in our country. It's not that because we have positions at these kind of meetings that we're not doing work, and the work has to be done in speaking to people. Citizens have to be convinced also of the benefit of circulation and many of the issues that we talk about. The second element, and that's why I started, I don't have much time, because I'm all the time stressed by time. And I have the feeling that in the post-2015, we may be too static in the way we are thinking. 2015 is yesterday, 2030 is just tomorrow morning. And what is going on in between? There's a digital revolution, there is an increasing level of inequality, and the third big disruption is that perhaps in 2030 we can't go skiing anymore because of the planetary boundaries and all the issues linked to that. Those are the three very major issues on which all this is embedded. And now I take a quick example of a recent visit to Sicily, where thousands of migrants are arriving, also with the Mare Nostrum support. And I spoke to some children in one of the centers. They had just arrived. 12-year-old kids coming from Egypt, 13-year-old from Mali, 16-year-olds from Somalia. What are they talking about? They had just arrived. They said, computer and a phone, please. Emotions. They want to speak back home, or they want to speak to the ones that they're trying to join. In the post-2015, we should be thinking about education as the way it's going to be in the coming years, which is not the little bag as we had with our pencil and so on. It's about forums on computers where you have a South African, a Somali, a Swiss, who are learning together on the same forum. And in the post-2015, we have to be careful not to be too static, because the world is progressing, and as you all know, faster than it has ever done. And by the year I would have left this terrestrial life, the world would certainly not be the same as it is now. Far from that.
Okay. You can make an announcement. Okay, Fatima.
Thank you that you give me opportunity again to speak. My recommendation is still diaspora organizations as a global partner, full global partner. We have seen that diaspora are contributing poverty reduction. We have seen that we are contributing for all the MDGs, unnoticed. We are working, we are doing everything, and I believe that poverty reduction and migration have somewhere linked roots of the migration. If we go back, where I come from, Somalia, there is a conflict, there is a poverty. People are going to have a new life, build something. So there is some linking between poverty reduction and migration. What we are advocating is diaspora has to be taken as a global partner, a serious partner, also post-2015. We have seen that they are contributing not only remittances, but also development and development goals. So I'm still recommending and I'm advocating that diaspora has to be taken as a serious global partner, also post-2015, because there is an actor that is not noticed in MDGs. If you see the MDGs formulating, you don't see diaspora organizations and diaspora contribution is. And I'm afraid that also sustainable development goals, which is coming after 2015, that diaspora also stay unnoticed. So we have to try to make sure that diaspora has to be a partner, because we have an MDG 8, which is indicating partners, actor. Diaspora can be partner on this goal or other goals that will come. So diaspora has to be involved in policy making and development of the new sustainable development goals, and has to be also be actor who can be realized poverty reduction in home country. So that is my point, and thank you very much, and I hope that will be taken in the sustainable development goals. Thank you.
I have a sense Fatuma is interested in diaspora. Michelle.
Yes. Maybe just to respond to the point on healthcare, I actually think it's an interesting way of giving a concrete example of how to realize some of these goals and maybe the indicators. Because Sweden, since it's established its law allowing undocumented to have access to healthcare, and that's actually one of the framing issues, and one of the goals is access to healthcare. I don't know the exact wording, but I know that's one of the aims, is also to get migrants visible within that particular goal. Sweden has not been flooded with people as health tourists, as you know, the people coming to seek healthcare in Sweden since this law has been established last year. They have not been flooded with extreme costs neither, and I think Eva and the colleagues can speak much better to this, but from practical experience of civil society on the ground, we know what the reality is. And I think this is important to also show as an example, because it also conceptualizes how to make one of these goals applicable to migration, to migrants, and also even the most vulnerable migrants, and to see what are the outcomes also for the state. The state, in giving access to healthcare for undocumented, will reduce the costs of emergency care because more will seek preventative care. Health professionals will be able to uphold their Hippocratic oath. They won't have to turn people away. Transmittable diseases will be better in check because the whole population. So there are many things that we have to look at. What are the benefits for the state? What are the benefits for the wider community? And I also think it's interesting what Gregory was saying of public perception of migrants. And I think this is what we constantly face in the North, working as migrants' rights advocates, is how to counter a lot of public perception and also policy level negative perception. And I think that this example is a clear one, because there was a public inquiry to have this access to healthcare for undocumented, and the public inquiry said it would be beneficial to have it. The public is also healthcare professionals. We shouldn't also forget that the public is very diverse. So the public are also school teachers. And one image that I've been perplexed with over the past days is the image of Michelle Obama on the cover of the New York Times or wherever, with this thing, "Bring Back Our Girls," this Twitter thing, trying to get more media coverage, more publicity for the girls who were kidnapped in Nigeria, the 200 girls. And I've been perplexed by it because I was thinking, because of what she said in the article, she was saying, President Obama and I see these girls like our daughters. And what do we need to do to make more of these perceptions, especially for policymakers, that she sees these girls and her daughters, the girls who are also kidnapped along, from Central America to the US, can they also be seen as daughters? The other migrants, how can we make this perception and how can we change this mind frame? And why I find it perplexing is what do we need to do better to do this? Do we need to be more concrete with our indicators? Do we need to change the framing, the mindset? But these are challenges that I think we all face, and so we're very happy to have this discussion and continue the discussion. I'd like to just call on ICMC, who has some practical announcements before lunchtime.
Indeed, and we ask WIS to come to make those announcements. And in the meantime, I think many of us should have this identity, this registration card. And some of you may not also have this elegant black contraption which you need so that you can wear it proudly. So if you don't have one, please make sure you get one. And I think Wiz is making her way. And of course, we cannot apologize enough about not being able to get everyone's comments in. Oh, we've got Christina.
Yes,
Over
sorry.
to you.
All right. Well, I have a few announcements. The first one, lunch, most important, is served behind here and here. So there are 2 spaces for lunch. And also during lunch, we'll have the side events. So we have MADE in Europe. We have the post-2015 Green Room. And we have the Alternatives to Immigration Detention of Children. So those will start at 12:30, so I'll try and keep this a little faster. And then after that, we go straight into breakout sessions. We don't have a break in between that because anyone who's not going to a side event is already taking a break and having lunch. So straight into the breakout sessions. And then if you would like, after the breakout sessions, we'll be having the launch of our new MADE, Migration and Development Civil Society Network. And that'll be back in here at 5:15. And following that will be a light reception with some entertainment and socialization, a little lighter. And for anyone using a headset, you can keep those all day. They will be able to change depending on the room you're in. So it'll update, but you can keep them. If it runs out of battery, you can come where you picked it up and switch it out. Anyone who didn't get their name tag this morning, all of the missing names have been printed, and we have lanyards. So the lanyards are downstairs, but also all around. And the exhibition space is also, as you've seen, kind of around, but if you have any documents you would like to put out, there's a table downstairs, as well as space underneath the windows, on the windowsills, that people are putting anything they want to share. And tomorrow morning, we do start at 8:30, straight into the breakout sessions. And let's see, I think that's it. IDs are very important. You can't stress it enough. We'll stress it even more tomorrow. You need them for Wednesday, so please do not lose them. All right, great. Have a nice lunch.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. We'll adjourn for lunch.
Yeah.
Okay.